this is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed Human.
There's a fire inside you you can't ignore. Stand still? Not a chance. You're a lifelong learner who's come this far. Now, we're here to help you keep going further. Capella University. What can't you do? Visit capella.edu to learn more.
Support for the show comes from Public, the investing platform for those who take it seriously. On Public, you can build a multi-asset portfolio of stocks, bonds, options, crypto, and now generated assets, which allow you to turn any idea into an investable index with AI. It all starts with your prompt. From renewable energy companies with high free cash flow to semiconductor suppliers growing revenue over 20% year over year, you can literally type any prompt and put the AI to work. It screens thousands of stocks, builds a one-of-a-kind index, and lets you backtest it against the S&P 500. Then you can invest in a few clicks. Generated assets are like ETFs with infinite possibilities, completely customizable and based on your thesis, not someone else's. Go to public.com/podcast and earn an uncapped 1% bonus when you transfer your portfolio. That's public.com/podcast. Paid for by Public Investing. Brokerage services by Open to the Public Investing Inc. Member FINRA and SIPC. Advisory services by Public Advisors LLC, SEC registered advisor. Generated assets is an interactive analysis tool. Output is for informational purposes only and is not an investment recommendation or advice. Complete disclosures available at public.com/disclosures.
Tired of spills and stains on your sofa? Wash away your worries with Anabay. Anabay is the only machine washable sofa inside and out, where designer quality meets budget-friendly prices. That's right, sofas start at just $699. Enjoy a no-risk experience with pet-friendly, stain-resistant, and changeable slip covers made with performance fabric. Experience cloud-like comfort with high-resilience foam that's hypoallergenic and never needs fluffing. The sturdy steel frame ensures longevity, and the modular pieces can be rearranged anytime. Shop WashableSofas.com for up to 60% off site-wide, backed by a 30-day satisfaction guarantee. If you're not absolutely in love, send it back for a full refund. No return shipping or restocking fees. Every penny back. Upgrade now at WashableSofas.com. Offers are subject to change, and certain restrictions may apply.
Cool Zone Media.
Hey everybody, Robert Evans here, and I wanted to let you know this is a compilation episode. So every episode of the week that just happened is here in one convenient and with somewhat less ads package for you to listen to in a long stretch if you want. If you've been listening to the episodes every day this week, there's going to be nothing new here for you, but you can make your own decisions.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to It Could Happen Here. It's Shireen, and today I'm joined by James and Robert to welcome our guest. In this episode, we are joined by Adam Broomberg. He is an artist, an activist, and an educator. He was born and raised in Johannesburg, South Africa. His parents and his entire extended family are Holocaust survivors, and he had a very Zionist upbringing. We talked to him about how he grew up in apartheid South Africa, how he broke free from Zionism as a teenager, and how he's come to be a very vocal Jewish anti-Zionist. He currently lives and works in Berlin, and he's exhibited his art all over the world. He's also regularly on the ground in Palestine, and he uses his work to raise awareness about the crimes committed daily by the IDF. Members of the German government have accused him and labeled him as being anti-Semitic because of his criticism of Israel. And we're going to get into all of it. So let's just go back into your background a little bit. Your family on both sides are Holocaust survivors, and your ancestors fled to South Africa, and that's where you grew up with your parents. And I read that you went to a Zionist school starting from age 6. Can you tell us about your family background and your experience going to a Zionist school as a Jewish person?
So you remember the podcast you did about Lithuania and that particular character who was from the Pale, who had to flee from the pogroms and all that stuff? Mm-hmm. So basically, this is part 3.
What he's talking about here is the Spanish Civil War, specifically about an episode we did more than a year ago. As many as 30% of the fallen volunteers who fought in some units in Spain were Jewish. Some of them, like Al Chaikin, who I've written about a lot, had fled persecution in the Pale of Settlement at a very young age and arrived in the USA to relative safety. But after a few years in the USA, they began to see the menace of anti-Semitism spreading back towards them through Nazi Germany and later through fascist Italy. and they decided to take up arms and stop it when it threatened to overwhelm democratic Spain.
Imagine that kid gets on a boat, and that kid is my grandfather. My grandfather's name is Joshua, right? And he's like a towering 6'3" beautiful man. He's studying medicine. He's fleeing his mother. His family's not wealthy. The pogroms are going on. He's studying medicine. Very bright guy. But every cell in his body says, "You've got to get out of here." Also, he gets this opportunity. He meets a woman called Dora Klatchko, my grandmother, who's like 4'2", right? But comes from a very wealthy family in Lithuania. And it's kind of an arranged setup. And I think Joshua's paid. Anyway, they get on a boat bound for South Africa. Some landed up in Scotland, oddly, because the boats bound for America, they would disembark most of the all of the people on board and tell them they were in America, and then take a whole lot of other people and then carry on to America so they could double the fee, by the way. But anyway, so Joshua and Dora land up on the boat, and they land in the port of Durban. It's around 1933.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And they speak mostly Yiddish. They've never seen a black person in their life. They land up, on these foreign shores. My grandmother, I think, headed towards Johannesburg. And this I got from my mother on her deathbed. My mum passed away December 17th last year. So it's like 6-7 months ago. And she did it magnificently. And she managed to tell those last little bits of stories. And one of those was that her mother, Dora, had a child who died at 9 months old. And she was alone in Johannesburg when the child died. And Joshua, her husband, was still in Durban. So you can imagine the weirdness of that, right? I mean, imagine the father of your child not coming to be with you when you lose your child, coupled with the fact that they had both lost. I think Dora, my grandmother, was one of 8 or 9 children. I think only 3 survived the Holocaust, and her parents were killed, and the same with Joshua. So they lost all their family, and there they were at the bottom tip of Africa, right? Without any kind of orientation, really.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about, you mentioned how you described them as bottom feeders. I listened to another podcast you were on, and you said that your family suddenly really enjoyed and appreciated the change in status they had in society. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, yeah. So, they got on the boat and their identity were they were Jews. So they were expelled from Europe as Jews. The minute their toes touched the land in Africa, their identity transformed from being Jewish to being white.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
So suddenly they were identified as white people. Like the word Jew almost just fell off. That yellow star that they had to wear, It just fell off. So suddenly they were like, oh my God. They were utterly privileged, powerful, and in control, right? And with all of the corruption that apartheid provided for the elite, for the white supremacists, for the white people. The Jews who arrived were able to plug into that privilege. And there was about 250, 300,000 Jews who fled and arrived in South Africa. So it was quite a big community. And they did very fucking well, let me tell you. And I can tell you why I can tell you. Because my father, who I just saw about 3 days ago, what's left of him, when he was active and like potent, he was the top tax lawyer in South Africa, which means that his clients, and those clients are people who walked through my house, came through my house in the 70s and the 80s, were probably the most hideous characters in history. You know, we're talking Sol Kerzner. Now, Sol Kerzner started something called Sun City, and he exploited the Bantustan, the homeland system that apartheid built. And he built this casino, hotel, resort called Sun City.
At this point in our conversation with Adam, we wanted to ask about his personal journey into anti-Zionism and where it all began.
So I think an interesting way to approach this then would be like, obviously they found themselves, and your parents have found themselves in this country which is systematically discriminating against people, right? It's this apartheid South Africa. And Jewish people were at once active in the anti-apartheid movement, and as you're saying, also active in the apartheid government and the apartheid regime. And you found yourself, I guess, going to this school, which was explicitly Zionist. And I'm wondering, at what point, and I suppose this involves seeing what's happening where you are as well as what's happening in Palestine. At what point did you make that connection and be like, this like what because you're very explicitly anti-Zionist, right? Like
yeah.
What was it? Something you read, something you saw? Like, what caused you to make that leap, and how was that received in South Africa?
So I think it's a mixture of things. I think I've got 3 older siblings. So I'm the last born by 7 years. I've got a brother, Paul, who's 7 years older, a sister, Mandy, who's 9 years older, who lives in Israel. And my oldest brother, Jonathan, is 10 years older than me. Jonathan and Paul specifically, was very politically active. So he started an organization. Unlike Israel, in South Africa, the universities were like the bastions of the anti-apartheid movement, right? And he was in NUSAS, National Union of South African Students, and he started a thing called the End Conscription Campaign, which was to fight against forced conscription of white men who were compulsory, called up into the army at the age of 18. And so, given the fact that he was 7 years older, when I hit about 14 or 15, at 15, I went on a thing called Ulpan, which is kind of, you've heard of Birthright, right?
Yeah.
Ulpan is something, so I went to the Zionist Jewish day school. So every day I'd go, I'd have to pray, like go into the synagogue, pretend to pray for about an hour, right? And I was looking at my school, like my sister is like a gorgeous archivist, and she made this little book called Adam's Life. And I was looking at the school grades at the age of 6, and it was like Jewish studies. And we know what those Jewish studies were, right? So you walked into the Jewish studies room, and there was a little blue tin, which was the Jewish National Fund, and you would put your spare change in there, and that money would go towards making the desert bloom, I say, in like quote marks, right? So that money would go to planting like 240 million pine trees in, which are not indigenous in Israel. But just to swing back, so at about 14 or 15, what happened is in parallel, I was being told on a daily basis two things. I was being told, now you got to remember, this was the heights of also the Cold War. So there were these proxy wars that were being fought all around South Africa, in Angola, in Mozambique. So in Mozambique, you had Frelimo, who were backed up by Cuba, Russia, right? You had Renamo that were backed up by America and South Africa. And they were running these kind of guerrilla bush wars, right? And many of my friends who were called up in the military would be flown into Angola or into Mozambique, be dropped there, and they were told, look, if something happens, you weren't here. You're not there. We're not going to come and find you.
What Adam's referring to here are the proxy conflicts throughout Africa that saw national liberation movements, often supported by Cuba and the USSR, fighting against various last-class colonial regimes and African anti-communist groups. These groups were often supported by the US under the guise of anti-communism. These wars include the Civil War in Angola, the Namibian War of Independence, the Mozambican War of Independence, and the Zimbabwe War of Independence. You might know the last one as the Rhodesian Bush War, but Rhodesia doesn't exist anymore. Living in the United States, it's easy to use the phrase Cold War as a conflict-free standoff mediated by nuclear powers chest-thumping, without acknowledging that, in many parts of the world, proxy wars in these post-colonial states and the conflicts of decolonialization throughout the late 20th century made that period anything but cold.
The point is that, so at the age of 14, I'm going to these schools, and I'm being told every day that if apartheid ended, that would mean the end of the white people in South Africa, right? Because we were by far the minority. White people were by far the minority. I don't know what it was, 10, 12%? And there was this kind of, you could see the fear because the walls started getting higher. The security gates were built, the razor wire, the electric fences. It became more increasingly visible in the 80s, the fear, like keeping apartheid, keeping people apart. So I was told all the time, like, if apartheid ended, that would mean the end of white people. At the same time, I was told, given that my community was like second generation Holocaust surviving, the notion of Israel as a place of salvation, a place of when the shit hits the fan, that's where we can go, right? And that we were always told that. And we were also told daily, this is a land without people for a people without land. That became a kind of mantra. Honestly, it was like, it was said to me over and over again, right? So, but what started happening is, I think that I became an activist at the age of 16. There's an amazing, she's now a dear friend of mine, we've reconnected. She's a theater director called Yael Faber. And we started an organization called Links at the age of 16, which was to educate white kids about apartheid. And what we started to do was to literally kind of break the apartheid wall. We'd start doing visits into Soweto. We'd start doing visits into Alexandria Township. And we started forming friendships. And, most kids just didn't go out of the suburbs. And suddenly we'd go away on these weekends, like led by kind of older activists, and we'd all hang in the same, we'd all sleep in the same dormitories, and we'd start chatting and smoking cigarettes together. And so like genuine, just basic childhood friendships started forming. And when that stuff, that profound, very successful othering that the propaganda of apartheid succeeded in creating, the black person as the other, as the enemy, which it does in Israel, right? On the other side of the apartheid wall is the worst enemy your imagination could possibly conjure up, right? And it's exactly the same process. And suddenly when I kind of pierced that wall and that started falling apart, then the kind of ideology around Israel and the notion that Palestinians didn't exist, suddenly they started to exist for me somehow. And so it was around the age of 16, I'd say.
And it's interesting that it was like through your experience of living in an apartheid state that you were able to, I think, appreciate that what was happening to the Palestinian people was like another form of settler colonialism.
I mean, I think, yeah, like none of this is intellectual. So I think like everything that came to me or has driven to me is through lived experience. It really is. So I think it's like through these friendships that I realized, and like touching skin. And this is the difference between apartheid South Africa and apartheid Israel Palestine, is that we were segregated by law. I mean, mixed marriages were prohibited by law. Sex was prohibited between races. But the thing is that we were mixed together because the labor force was needed, right? So, the 1916 Tax Act forced a lot of black migrant male workers into the cities to work on the gold mines, which meant that there was the presence of the other amongst us. And because there was the presence of the other, there was also the desire. And it is a sexual desire or a sensual desire. And the smells, and we would touch each other and we would walk through the city and kind of rub up against each other. Now, my nieces and nephews, having grown up under the Intifada and because of the apartheid war, they've been deprived of that sensual experience of the other.
In Palestine, Israel, you mean?
In Palestine, Israel, yeah. So that, they've built this 12-foot, 700-kilometer long concrete tsunami of a wall that divides people, which means that, until recently, nobody uttered the word Palestinian because they didn't exist, right? And so for my nieces and nephews, what was on the other side of that wall was, like I said, the worst enemy that their imagination could conjure up. And children's imaginations are amazing, right? And I did say this a while back, where how Foucault spoke about the structures that were built around the plague. And after the plague ended, you were still left with these structures, right? Now, let's think about the apartheid wall. You've got the 700-kilometer long, massive, concrete thing. It goes 5 meters underground, yeah? Now, unlike Foucault's hypothesis, that wall has created the plague. That wall has created the enemy, because what's on the other side of that wall that's only accessible through these little checkpoints that are manned by these, poor teenage, little foot soldiers of the state. That's the only way to penetrate that wall. So on the other side of that wall is whatever you tell the people is there. And that's the horror of that situation.
I'm kind of glad you brought up the plague idea, because you mentioned that on a different podcast, and I thought it was very poetic to illustrate that a plague can be constructed by the structure versus actually being the plague. Yeah.
And it's also kind of worth noting, as you were talking about the restrictions on interracial marriage in South Africa, versions of that very much still exist to this day in Israel, including heavy restrictions on intermarriage between Israeli and Palestinian people. That's a bigger topic than I want to just kind of casually get into, but like there's a number of restrictions that exist into the present day, because like civil marriage is not really a thing there as it is in a lot of other countries.
Yeah. So I wonder, like you said, that Palestinian people existed in your childhood only as this sort of construct, right? It's this othered construct. And your experience of Black people in South Africa had shown you that those other constructs were false and misleading and served perhaps an agenda. When you decided that like your stance was anti-Zionism, and then you said to I'm guessing to your friends, your family, to your fellow children at the school, like, hey, like this is fucked up here and this is fucked up there too. How was the response?
Well, it's like, one doesn't come to these decisions overnight and like announce it, right?
Yeah.
So there's vague memories I have. Like I said, I was on that Ulpan trip, which is like this 3-week or 3-month trip. I mean, they send like 115-year-old kids. You live in a building in Jerusalem, and it's basically like this 3-month propaganda tour, right? You're given a Bible and you're told that that's your guidebook. Literally, you traverse this place following the stories of the Bible, and that's meant to be like your holy land. But I did have one of the it's called a madrich, I think, a teacher. He must have been 18 or 19. He happened to be kind of like a vaguely liberal Zionist. And I remember clearly him taking me to an anti-Kahane protest. So there was still like Meir Kahane was alive. And we know that Meir Kahane, the Kahanist movement, as you know, was a kind of, they spawned the Ben Gvirs and these fascists who are in power now. But at the time, they were deemed a terrorist organization by America, and I remember going to an anti-Kahane protest. So somehow that planted a little seed in me, and I guess, I think the anti-Zionism came afterwards because I was so focused on the anti-apartheid struggle, because that's where I was and that's what I was doing. And my university was either spent like running battles with riot police or smoking weed. I literally went to about 3 classes, honestly. I was definitely the odd one out in my school. I mean, it being a Zionist Jewish day school, I'm still probably perceived as like an absolute fucking aberration,
Yeah, you did describe your mother in one podcast as a diehard Zionist, and so I can only imagine. And you mentioned your nephew and her husband both were in the IDF, so I can only imagine. I think it's good to bring up that despite all of that, you were able to like think deeply about it and work your way out of that brainwashing, essentially. Before I get too carried away, let's take our first break. We'll be right back. BRB. And we're back. I want to talk now about your experience in Germany and how you experienced like state level accusations of being an anti-Semitic person, even though you're just a vocal Jewish anti-Zionist. Can you talk about what led this person? I didn't even know this person existed. Stefan Hensel, who is the anti-Semitism commissioner of the city of Hamburg. That's a position someone has. But what led him to call you these really atrocious things in so many newspapers and like basically like just libelous stuff?
Okay, so check it out. So my mom dies the 17th of December, yeah? I go away to a yoga retreat where there's no like coverage. I'm offline. I get back to Berlin and there's emails from like people I really trust, and like serious people in my life saying, dude, you've got to respond to these allegations that are in like Die Zeit, Berliner Zeitung, Taz, basically every major newspaper in Germany and social media all over the place. There's this character, like you said, Stefan Hensel, who is the Commissioner of Anti-Semitism for the state of Berlin. Now, 8 of the states of Germany have commissioners of anti-Semitism, right? None of whom are Jewish, none of whom were elected. They kind of it's super weird. It's semi-legal. I mean, like, nobody knows they exist. Nobody elects them. This character, Stefan Hensel, and I don't want to pay too much attention to him because he's just like a nebulous Islamophobic, pro-Zionist, bureaucrat. But anyway, he does a series of interviews, and to summarize the numerous interviews and his social media posts, I am called, quote, literally, a hateful anti-Semite who advocates for terrorism against Jews. Now, this is 2 weeks after burying my Jewish mother, who was a second-generation Holocaust survivor. Now, that is the definition of gaslighting, right? Now, as a white man, it's testimony to my privilege that I haven't experienced gaslighting on a daily basis as most women do. Certainly, every Palestinian friend I have, they experience that every minute of their lives because their very essence is illegal, being Palestinian. The blood that runs through their veins is illegal. They don't exist because they're Palestinian, right? But so I stand accused of these things, and I'm gobsmacked. And the reason is because I've been vocal about my support and solidarity for Palestinian rights.
And it's particularly about your support for the BDS movement, right?
Exactly. So BDS, boycott, divestment, sanctions, has become a kind of, it's like one of these terms that emerges in the world. It's like terrorism or war on drugs or what other terms can we come up with? It's one of these catchphrases. And it's like BDS, yeah? And it's just like people don't even associate it with boycott, divestment, sanctions. If you break it down, what ended apartheid in South Africa? There was no sudden moral awakening. Basically, the Cold War ended. Reagan and Thatcher, who were total supporters of apartheid South Africa, suddenly the Cold War ended, South Africa wasn't that important an asset, and there was international pressure, and more and more people started to see what the atrocities that were going on, and sanctions and divestment started to happen, right? So Polaroid, the company Polaroid, I did a project about this, was one of the first companies that colluded with the South African government, but also divested when they were exposed. And that led to a number of banks divesting from South Africa. So sanctions and divestments, and essentially the South African government in the late 80s was financially broke. So they were forced to the negotiation table because they were broke. Not because they woke up one morning and said, "Oh my God, we're oppressing the majority of Black people in this country," and so it's just like they were forced to, and so BDS, which is a peaceful, non-violent means of resistance that started during the Second Intifada, has become one of these catchphrases. And I'll tell you a story. And this all came to a head around last year's Documenta, which happens in the city of Kassel in Germany. Now, Documenta is a really interesting art event in the art world calendar. And last year, Documenta was a very, very interesting little theater play. So what happened during Documenta last year is that there was a group of Palestinian artists who were invited to show work, and their space was invaded, and there was graffiti was sprayed on the walls. There were two things were sprayed. One was the number 187, and then the word Peralta.
Can you just explain what those both mean?
I'm not exactly sure, but 187 I can tell you.
Okay.
And the reason I can tell you is because 187 was spray painted outside my front door, inside my apartment building. And 187, as any gang member in California will tell you, is the Californian penal code for murder. And when you spray 187, it's a death threat.
Oh my God.
And
That's
so
really intense.
And so what the media did in Germany is said, oh, no, hang on. There's a hip-hop band in Hamburg called 187. Okay.
I wonder where that came from.
Wow.
Yeah, I was going to mention that Sublime also has a few songs with 187.
First Sublime.
Oh, they were just Sublime fans that graffitied on the
Yeah, they like that one Sublime song about the 92 riots.
the radical branch of the Sublime fan club came for you.
I mean, I'd love to hear this music. 187.
Buddy, I think you don't want to hear any Sublime.
No, I really do. After this, I'm going to actually listen to it. But so on the morning when so back to Documenta, so they spray painted the staff, and then there was a furor because there was an Indonesian collective who did a giant mural, and one of the characters in this mural depicted an IDF soldier, an Israeli Defense Force soldier, or an Israeli occupying force soldier, as a pig, right? Policeman, soldier as a pig. I mean, that's an old trope. We've all done it, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, they're the pigs. Police are the pigs. But there was an IDF as a pig, and so it was deemed anti-Semitic. And fair enough. It's like, it's Germany, it's an Israeli person in a uniform depicted as a pig. It's tasteless, it's tacky. Immediately they kind of covered the mural up, right? But bang, the troops came in. The Israel lobby, the Jewish lobby came in, boom, right? They seized the opportunity and they hit. And suddenly the word BDS came in, right? And so the two curators from Gurung Rupa, who were amongst the collective who were curating that year's Documenta, were visiting professors at the art school in Hamburg, where I had been a professor for the previous 6 years. Okay? And Stefan Hensel, like a little kind of surgeon, he pinpointed these three little pernicious kind of pro-Palestinian people that were inside a German university, and he wanted to remove them with his little tweezers. And so he grouped us together, and he slammed the word anti-Semitism. He accused us of being anti-Semitic. And so he weaponized this word. And this word, like, it's such an interesting word, right? Anti-Semitism. It's like, so here you've got a guy. Now, he's never declared, and not that it's of any interest to me whether he's Jewish or not. I mean, I don't think he has the right to buy into my lineage of trauma.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't have that right. But he married a Jew. He named his son, I think, David or something, right? These are, so there's all these kind of like gestures
to make him seem like he's has the like ability to say these things.
Not a loophole as much as a kind of dress code. Yeah?
Right.
It's like
they're ticking the boxes.
My son's called David. I'm married to a Jewish person. I've lived in Israel for 6 years. I ran the Jüdische, the Israelische Germanische organization, Israel-German organization, which is like, an Islamophobic kind of weird ass think tank. I don't know what they do, right? But the point is, here's this guy, and I bet you, I would lay money on it, that his parents or his grandparents were perpetrators during the Holocaust. And this is the way, this is the psychological twist. This is the beautiful little whoo that the mind does to get oneself out of like feeling shit about yourself.
Yeah. I mean, even attempting to remove those people from their posts is like, that's a great example of Germany using anti-Semitism, like weaponizing it at an institutional level. Like that's really unfortunate. I do want to mention this really quick. In 2019, Germany tried to make BDS a hate crime. And even though it was challenged and then it was found to be unconstitutional, that the fact that attempt was made, from what I understand, there's still an attitude in Germany about BDS being this illegal-ish thing.
Totally.
Is that fair to say?
Exactly. So it's like, my father was a lawyer, as I said. So I know the difference between law and justice. And I know what a test case means. So you bring something to trial means it enters into the language of society, right? And when you say, is BDS anti-Semitic, and you test this thing, suddenly there's this presumption, and there is a presumption that BDS is anti-Semitic. And I can give you concrete examples of how it's happened, how it's played out over the last couple of years.
Oh, wait. So, I want James to mention, you looked up that word, right, James?
Isabel Peralta. Yeah, I'm familiar with her, unfortunately. And I think this kind of lines up with the sort of, she came on the scene in 2021. I had been around doing anti-Semitism for a long time. She is a self-described fascist in Spain. She's part of a group, or at the time was leading a group called Juventud Patriótica, which is patriotic youth. And the speech that she's most famous for was delivered at a commemoration for the División Azul, which is a blue division. They're the Francoist volunteers who fought for Nazi Germany. Which, if you're commemorating that, you're kind of a piece of shit. And then she went on to be a further piece of shit, I suppose, by she's very explicit in her anti-Semitism, right? She doesn't do what a lot of these people do and kind of veil it. She talks about Jewish people as the eternal enemy. And it's worth pointing out that in Spain has had what's largely called anti-Semitism without Jews, or sometimes called that, because Spain conducted an ethnic cleansing, right? Conducted a literally, they'll call it a limpieza, like a cleansing and a removal of Jewish people. And Spanish Jewish population is still very small. And so this sort of virulent anti-Semitism that we're seeing on her behalf, it had impacts all around Europe. And she was kind of the most prominent and outspoken anti-Semite for a little while there.
So that was the name they graffitied along with 187.
Yeah, I guess trying to tie this documenta to her disgusting anti-Semitic, which is entirely distinct things, right? Like, I think as you were saying, Adam, like that by putting the two in the same phrase, we conflate them when they are entirely distinct things. And she, I think all of us would agree, is a terrible person who has reprehensible views.
But if we dig a little deeper, we get to the core, which is, why did the Nazis and the Zionists collaborate in the 1930s? Because they had the same desire. They wanted the same outcome. They wanted the Jews out of Europe. They wanted them to move to Palestine, right? Zionism was a European project started in the early 20th century in Vienna. They wanted the Jews out of Europe and into Palestine. The Zionists did, so they collaborated. And I think, really, truly, I think that we do face a real threat of real anti-Semitism in Germany. And I have 2 children. My daughter is 13. Her name's Lenny. My little boy is 10. His name's Marlo. And if you look at the police report of 2022 that was released in Berlin, there are numerous incidents of visual and quite violent incidents of real anti-Semitism, right?
Yeah.
And why are we not addressing that? Because my kids are in danger. And instead, we have the Minister of Culture, whose name is Claudia Roth, stand up a couple of weeks ago on a Friday night at the opening of HKW, a huge institution that my dear friend Bonaventure, who comes from Cameroon, he's been made the head of this institution. And it's a Friday night, and the hall is full of people. And it's glorious. It's a beautiful night. I mean, you have diversity like you've never seen. This is like queer, diverse, blackness, indigenous thought. It's queer thought. It's like fucking Peaches is there. Everyone's there. You know what I mean? And Claudia Roth takes the stage. She takes the microphone. And what does she say? She says, and there's silence in the room, and she says, BDS is anti-Semitic. Like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
BDS is anti-Semitic. And I'll tell you, I love Bona. Now, let me tell you about Bonaventure. Bona came from Cameroon 13 years ago. He has a PhD. His PhD is in biotechnology. He worked all day building pacemakers while he set up a cultural institution called Savvy Contemporary. And Savvy represented the BIPOC community in Berlin and in Germany, right? Bona is a genius. He deals with post-colonialism he's a maestro. He's amazing. What he has done, he's changed the landscape of this country. He's brought colonialism into the discourse of the country, into the culture, right? But my fear is they've used him as a Trojan horse. And the German states have got their fist up his fucking ass. And that night, when it was Bonner's night, it was the night of diversity. There comes this pernicious Minister of Culture, and she stands up And out of the blue, she says, BDS is anti-Semitic. Bonner, because he's such a graceful, smart man, and because he knows that we are fighting intersectional struggles that happen at different velocities and happen at different speeds and come at different angles, he came up on stage and he said, "We come in peace." It scares me.
No, it's I could only imagine what it was like to be there in person. I mean, it sounds mortifying, especially if you're Palestinian or Arab or just an anti-Zionist in general. I brought up a story here that I heard Adam talk about on a different show, but Future Me is recording this now because I wanted you to have some more context to the story so you can really grasp the irony of it all. It's a great example of the divide and intensity that happens, or that can happen, with anti-Zionists and Zionists within the Jewish community itself. Adam said that some of the people who he had assumed were friends and allies have disappeared, which is one of the prices you pay for criticizing Israel. Adam had been spending more time in Hebron, what he described as a wasteland. He said in a previous interview that you spend 10 minutes at Hebron and you get the notion of apartheid, occupation, and Jewish supremacy. You get it, and no one has to utter the words. Adam has documented violence in places like maximum security jails, Afghanistan in 2003, Iraq in 2005, but he said the 2 times he's felt the most existentially and physically at threat of death, one of those times was last year, when he was in Hebron and him and his team went to take photos of olive trees. Olive trees in that area can be 2,000 to 4,000 years old, and since 1967, Israeli settlers have destroyed 1 million of these trees. I have an episode about this and the significance of the Palestinian olive tree, about how it's not only an immensely important crop, but also a symbol of Palestinian culture and resistance. I talk about this in that episode as well, but it bears repeating that destroying olive trees is one of the most clear examples that Zionism isn't about wanting to return to a sacred land that is destined to you. Instead, Zionism is hateful and inexcusable. Adam shares this sentiment, which I appreciate, and I really loved learning about his work with olive trees. I just don't think Zionists have any kind of rebuttal or reasoning to support why the hell they keep destroying olive trees decade after decade. Like, in what universe can you say and believe that you have a genuine attachment to that land, a biblical right to that land? Like, how could you say that you love that land as a sacred space, but then also go and destroy what Adam describes as its, quote, oldest indigenous citizens, aka the olive trees? That's not a person who loves that land. That is a person who is driven by hate. So Adam is working to preserve and protect these trees. Settlers pour gasoline down the center of the tree trunk, so by the time you see smoke, the tree is already dead. He was there in Hebron with a camera taking photos of the trees, and then Jewish settlers sent these packs of kids that he said were ages 5 to 17, dressed in full religious garb, accompanied by the Israeli military. Adam and his crew kept getting attacked by these kids as the military stood by, but he explained that you can't lift a finger to defend yourself because these kids are minors. Adam talked about this and said, "If I was Palestinian and I pushed back, I would be shot on the spot. The fact that I'm Jewish, I would just be removed and the work would simply be over." So he got beaten pretty badly several times, and apparently there's footage of it somewhere. And his experience in Hebron, again, is one of those 2 times that he's felt the most existentially and physically at the threat of death. The second time happened a few days later, which is the story I briefly mentioned to him in the recording that we did that I want to talk about more here. So a few days after that incident, Adam returned to Berlin, and it happened to be the anniversary of Kristallnacht, or the Night of Broken Glass, which is widely known as the beginning of the Holocaust. It's also called the November Pogrom, and it was a pogrom against Jews carried out by the Nazi Party with some participation from the Hitler Youth and German civilians throughout Nazi Germany on the 9th and 10th of November in 1938. The German authorities looked on as this happened without intervening. The name Kristallnacht is literally translated to Crystal Night, And this name comes from the shards of broken glass that littered the streets after the windows of Jewish-owned stores, buildings, and synagogues were smashed. So back to Adam's story. A memorial for Kristallnacht is held at the site of the 2 oldest synagogues that had been burned down in Germany. Adam arrived there with a crew, holding signs that said, "Jews against fascism everywhere." He's surrounded by fellow Jewish people, and this big guy comes up to Adam, and Adam describes this guy as being much bigger and much taller than him. And so this big guy looks down at Adam and he says, "Get rid of those signs. Who gave you the right to be here?" Adam responded, quote, "The death of 90% of my family? What troubles you about the sign? Are you anti-Semitic? Are you fascist? Are you bothered by the word everywhere? Have you got this weird synesthesia thing where you see the word everywhere and you see Israel? Do you think I'm implying that there's a possibility that Israel could have fascist traits?" In response to this big guy starts attacking Adam. So Adam ran, absolutely terrified. He ran and sought protection from the German police. The irony of a Jewish person feeling his life threatened by another Jewish person and then seeking refuge from the German police. Adam says this was the most surreal moment of his life.
So ironic. But let me flip that story on its head, right? And now, okay, so it's 1988, and I am on the front page of a newspaper, and I get home to my mother, and she's furious. She's fucking furious, because there I am on the front page of the newspaper, and I'm there. My face is there, and I'm holding up a flower, and in front of me is a South African riot policeman, right? And it was one of the demonstrations I was at the age of 18 on the campus at Wits University, all right? And I got into shit from my mother, who said, "What the fuck are you doing standing in front of the riot police?" I got into shit from the Black Student Society because we as white students took orders from the Black Student Society. He said, "What are you doing holding a flower to the fucking pig? Dude, it's like, it's not the 1960s. We're fighting a struggle." So I got in shit from both sides, right?
Yeah.
Now, cut to May. A few months ago, I'm in Oranienplatz. There is a commemoration organized for the ongoing Nakba, all right? We know what the Nakba is, the catastrophe, right? Mm-hmm. So we don't have to explain that. But the year before that, all commemorations for the Nakba were banned. And in May, the commemorations for the Nakba organized by Palestinian groups were banned. So Jüdische Stimme, which means Jewish Voices, the organization, they organized a commemoration, and we gathered together on a beautiful Sunday morning, and it was really lovely, and there were kids there, there were old people, it was great. And we were all gathered together there, and we gave the platform to some Palestinian voices who were just speaking about freedom from the river to the sea, and suddenly the riot police came, boom, 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 lines of them intersected us. And I was faced again at the age of 52, not 18. So flip from 1988 to 2023, and I'm facing eye to eye with a fucking white riot policeman. And it was the same riot policeman. And you know what I said to him? I said to him, "Where was your grandmother during the war?" And he didn't answer me. And I said, "Do you know where my grandmother was?" And he said, "I don't care." At which point I turned around, and 2 or 3, and there's footage of this from every single angle. 2 or 3 of these riot policemen jumped on top of me, brutally beat me and arrested me, handcuffed me. They handcuffed me so tightly that they had to call the fucking fire brigade to cut the handcuffs off me. And like, hang on, it gets worse. Then an hour later, I'm on the front page of the Berliner Zeitung. There I am being marched off by German police, riot police. And you know what the headline says? 100 anti-Semitic Palestinian protesters disrupt Jewish memorial.
Wow.
Check it out.
Gosh.
Check it out. And you know what? I think it's still up there.
Yeah.
Okay? This is where we're at. This is where we're at in this country. Like, forget fact checking. This is not a Palestinian. I'm a fucking Jew. You've arrested a fucking third generation Holocaust surviving Jew, you motherfucking Nazi. And they tell me denazification never happened in this country. There's no such thing as neo-Nazis. They're Nazis, man. And this Stefan Hensel, he wants the Jews out of Germany. That's what's underneath all of this shit, right? Because if they were worried about anti-Semitism, let's talk about anti-Semitism, okay? Because I've got kids and they need to be safe.
Yeah.
I mean, I was reading the other day a news article from, I think, 51 or 52 that was about one of the, God, now I'm spacing on his name, but he was a Wehrmacht general who was, commanded troops on the Ostfront, survived the war, and later got into German politics. And it was an article about one of his political rallies where protesters were like broken up and beaten up by German police officers. And it's kind of this same, like, yeah, what was your family doing during those 12 years? Like it's rare. It's a question you can ask, but it's rarely really a question, right?
Right.
Yeah. Like there was never any, that's such an important point, particularly when we talk about like why there is, such what you can call technically support for Israel that's rooted, as you noted often, in just getting Jewish people out of Germany. Yeah. Like there was never any kind of real denazification.
No, not on a systemic level.
This is all about white supremacy, man, because I'll tell you what, and this goes deeper. On the 15th of July, they made a law in Berlin that all public swimming pools, they claimed that there was a rise in violence in public swimming pools in Berlin, okay? Particularly in Neukölln and Kreuzberg, which, as we know, are the areas of like migrants, particularly Palestinian, Middle Eastern migrants, right? And in fact, if you look at the statistics, from 2019 to 2022, violence has gone down by 21 or 23%. I can't remember correctly. So that's incorrect. But now we have a position where at the entrance of every swimming pool, there is a police van, and they are ethnically and racially profiling people who come into swimming pools, right? And there is basically a law that says that there shall not be more than 3 men, read 3 men of color, in a public swimming pool, okay? And this is where we're heading. Felix Klein, who's the Federal Commissioner of Anti-Semitism, Stefan Hensel, who's the Hamburg one, these people, the mayor of Berlin, on Pentecost night, he tweeted, check out his tweet. He tweeted something, it went like this, it said, "We wish everybody a happy Pentecost, and we wish our guests a lovely time." Our guests. This is like, dude, I mean,
it's grim.
It's grim. It's fucking grim, man. And these people want a white Aryan Christian fucking country.
Yeah.
They want the dark people out.
I mean, that's a huge part that people don't realize, is that Zionism is mostly white supremacy and mostly very anti-Jewish, because it advocates for just like the expulsion of the Jews again.
Well, it's a fucking mental illness is what it is.
I don't disagree with you.
Yeah, I just wanted to reflect, like maybe as we end up on how far the needle has swung. When we talk about like anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism and sort of where because they do overlap, yeah, but they are not the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think about how there's this letter that the New York Times published, like it was in the late 1940s, 48, 49. It co-signed by a lot of prominent Jewish intellectuals, including Hannah Arendt, Albert Einstein, talking about the settler policies in Israel at that time and by Zionist groups at that time as fascist, which is something that would now be considered to be like a anti-Semitic. Like that's calling Israel fascist was what got you chased at him by that guy. It's considered to be anti-Semitic in Germany, right? Like, and these are people who, that had lost family members, like in their nuclear family to the Holocaust, like prominent Jewish intellectuals who would now be considered, I guess, anti-Semitic under this, like by saying shit the New York Times would publish. And the Times wouldn't publish that now.
Yeah.
A few of us got together in Oranienplatz, in the place where we were arrested in May. A few, like Jewish friends of mine, like some from Brooklyn, some from Israel, some from here. And, 5 nights ago, a young Palestinian man was arrested by 12 Israeli policemen, and they branded they cut with a knife the Star of David into his cheek.
Oh my God.
Yeah, and there's footage of this, and they literally cut the Star of David into his cheek, and we wore red Stars of David at this vigil tonight, and it just strikes me as ironic, like 80 years ago, my ancestors were forced to wear a yellow star as a lapel on their armband or stuck to their jackets, to shame them, to declare them as Jews, as dirty Jews in public. And now I feel like I've got to wear this red star because of our collective shame, because of what's being done in our name by the state of Israel and by Zionism. And this is not allowed to be done in my name, really.
That's
sorry to be so grim. Fuck.
No, I mean, if there was ever
it's
an
a
ending,
grim story. Yeah,
it's a grim story, but I think it's a great place to end. There's still so much I want to ask you. I would love to know your thoughts about like liberal Zionism, but that's going to have to wait for next time. Thank you for giving us your time in the middle or the early mornings.
Thank you so much.
Of course.
Yeah. Adam, where can people find you online and help support the advocacy you're doing?
Mostly, I'm a bit of a geriatric, so I'm just on Instagram, Adam Brumberg.
Great, good stuff.
I'll put it in the description for anyone that is curious. Thank you for doing your work. Everyone, go follow Adam. Make sure everyone doesn't. Just let's protect Adam. Let's protect Adam and his family out there. But thank you again.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Adam. Really appreciate it, mate.
And that's the episode.
Support for the show comes from Public, the investing platform for those who take it seriously. On Public, you can build a multi-asset portfolio of stocks, bonds, options, crypto, and now generated assets, which allow you to turn any idea into an investable index with AI. It all starts with your prompt. From renewable energy companies with high free cash flow to semiconductor suppliers growing revenue over 20% year over year, you can literally type any prompt and put the AI to work. It screens thousands of stocks, builds a one-of-a-kind index, and lets you backtest it against the S&P 500. Then you can invest in a few clicks. Generated assets are like ETFs with infinite possibilities, completely customizable and based on your thesis, not someone else's. Go to public.com/podcast and earn an uncapped 1% bonus when you transfer your portfolio. That's public.com/podcast. Paid for by Public Investing. Brokerage services by Open to the Public Investing Inc. Member FINRA and SIPC. Advisory services by Public Advisors LLC, SEC registered advisor. Generated assets is an interactive analysis tool. Output is for informational purposes only and is not an investment recommendation or advice. Complete disclosures available at public.com/disclosures.
Sink into affordable luxury. Anabay is the only machine washable sofa, inside and out. With stain-resistant slip covers and a cloud-like frame duvet, everything goes right in the wash. Plus, the modular design lets you change the look of your space anytime. Visit WashableSofas.com to upgrade your home. Shop up to 60% off site-wide, with sofas starting at just $699 and a 30-day money-back guarantee. Shop now at WashableSofas.com. Offers are subject to change, and certain restrictions may apply.
Hey, this is U.S. Olympic gold medalist Tara Davis Woodhull.
And I'm U.S. Paralympic gold medalist Hunter Woodhull.
As athletes, our lives are about having a clear path.
And a team that you can absolutely trust.
So when it came to getting the best mortgage,
we chose PennyMac.
PennyMac is proud to be the official mortgage provider of Team USA and you.
Learn more at pennymac.com. PennyMac Loan Services, LLC, Equal Housing Lender, NMLS ID 35953. Licensed by the Department of Financial Protection and Innovation under the California Residential Mortgage Lending Act. Conditions and restrictions may apply.
Hi everyone, it's me, James, and I'm coming at you today sweaty, smelly, and exhausted from my pickup truck out in the desert, where I have been spending the weekend trying my best to help, along with lots of other dedicated mutual aid workers, to mitigate the damage done by an entirely preventable humanitarian crisis at the United States southern border. People are being held in the open desert in Jacumba, where it gets hot in the day, gets very cold at night, and there are children, there are old people, there are young people. All the support they're getting is from mutual aid workers. They maybe get some water from Border Patrol, from federal government, and not much else. And I'm here before your podcast to ask you if you can to help. We've all spent all of our time and most of our money the last few days, week, trying to help, and we're all pretty broke and we're all pretty tired, but I could really do with your support. And I'm going to give the Venmos and Cash Apps and PayPal information for two organizations who I dearly love and whose work I have seen is extremely effective and is the only thing keeping this situation from being a lot worse. And please don't think that if you don't have much money that you shouldn't give. We can do a lot with little. So if you only have $5, that is great. $5 is a tarp for someone to sleep under, or a few hot meals. And what we're going to buy is food, blankets, tarps, water, the things that stop people dying in the desert. Those two organizations, Border Kindness and Free Shit Collective, can be found online at Border Kindness and at Free Shit PB on Twitter. For Border Kindness, the Venmo is at border-kindness. The Cash App is $Border Kindness Cash, and the Zelle and PayPal information is info@borderkindness.org. Free Shit Collective are at Free Shit Collective on Cash App and PayPal, and at Free Shit PB on Twitter. Thank you very much, guys.
Welcome to It Could Happen Here, a podcast about things falling apart and sometimes how to put them back together again. I'm your host, Mia Wong. Now, this is not one of those times where it's about how to put things back together again. This is one of those episodes about why everything is absolutely awful. And one of the reasons why everything is absolutely awful, and something I've been driven progressively more and more insane by in the past sort of half a decade, is the way people think and talk about class in the United States. Why, for example, do people think that Trump is working class? Why am I watching people argue that being a barista isn't actually being a worker? Why are all these millionaires driving Ford F-150s while simultaneously claiming that they are also somehow working class? Why are billionaires fleeing to Colorado and Wyoming to cosplay as workers by wearing jeans and t-shirts to bars? Why is every right-wing dipshit posting the same video of a guy in an oil rig committing approximately 60,000 OSHA violations? Why is it that the only part of the working class that anyone ever seems to call the working class is the white working class? Why is it that when people talk about the white working class and then try to explain it with data, and this is true across the entire ideological spectrum, why do they start defining working class by things that are objectively not class, like education levels? And this reached a breaking point with me a few weeks ago and has finally caused me to snap and write this. Now, I've given the game away a little by leading with the white working class stuff, because a lot of the reason that everything sounds so nuts is that when people talk about class in the US, most of the time what they're actually talking about is race and gender. And this pisses me off because I think more about class than a lot of people with my ideology usually do, and I think it can actually be a very useful way to understand the world. However, thinking and talking about class as a kind of floating signifier that you can just jam conservative racial and gender politics into is a really, really bad way to talk about class. On top of just the racism and the sexism, this way of looking at class reduces class, which is a social relation, into aesthetics and grievances. And this leads to the question, how did this all happen? Now, you could take a really expansive look at this here and go back to, Aristotle or start later with Locke or something, but I'm not going to do that because, partially because this would be 17 years long if I tried to do this, and this episode is already now 3 episodes. The other reason I'm not going to do this is that the actual story of how everything got like this is the story of how the right adapted and distorted the incredibly successful leftist conception of labor that built the identity of the working class in the 1800s and 1900s. And in order to do that, we need to talk about the labor theory of value. Now, when I talk about the labor theory of value, there are 2 things going on here. You have, on the one hand, Marx's law of value, and then you have the set of slogans that are passed down the main line of the workers' movement. And these are not the same thing at all, even though when someone just says the labor theory of value, if that's a thing that you've heard of, you probably immediately think Marx. So, for example, let's get into a sense of sort of what this kind of like sloganeering looks like. Here's the beginning of the Gotha program, which is the program of the German Social Democratic Party in the late 1800s. It begins, quote, "Labor is the source of all wealth and all culture." Now, Marx hates this line. He writes a thing called the Critique of the Gotha Program, where he goes on a giant rant about how, nature also produces use values and so on and so forth. But, Marx's sort of bitterness at this aside, labor is the source of all wealth is a very, very common sentiment. It's the expression of the sort of common understanding of production class and the nature of value in the 19th and early 20th century. As the anthropologist David Graeber pointed out, Abraham Lincoln, a man who is by no means a socialist and is in fact the president of the United States, talks like this. Here's Lincoln, quote, "Labor is prior to and independent of capital. Capital is only the fruit of labor and could never have existed if labor had not existed first. Labor is superior of capital and deserves much the higher consideration." Now, this is obviously not something you'd ever hear from a president of the United States today, and we'll come back to Graeber's argument about why that is later, but I want to get a bit deeper into not just the common conception of the labor theory of value, but what the sort of capital W, capital M workers movement believed in. And this, as it turns out, has a tenuous relation to Marx, but is not the same thing. And I think is different enough that I'm actually not going to spend another 15 minutes trying to explain Marx's version of the labor theory of value or Marx's law of value, because it doesn't ultimately matter that much, which is a very weird thing to say about the actual sort of, about sort of Marx's role in the labor movement, but it kind of doesn't. So what I'm going to do instead is I should also mention, we are going to get a bit more into the things that Marx actually wrote and why they mattered to the specific movements next episode, but we'll deal with that tomorrow. In the meantime, I'm going to read a bit from the journal Endnotes from Unity and Separation. Supporting workers' claims to respectability was a vision of their destiny with 5 tenets. 1. Workers were building a new world with their own hands. 2. In this new world, workers were the only social group that was expanding, whereas all other groups were contracting, including the bourgeoisie. 3. Workers were not only becoming the majority of the population, they were also becoming a compact mass, the collective worker, who was being drilled in the factory to act in concert with the machines. 4. They were thus the only group capable of managing the new world in accordance with its innermost logic. Neither a hierarchy of order givers and order takers, nor the irrationality of market fluctuations, but rather an ever more finely grained division of labor. 5. Workers were proving this vision to be true. Since the class was realizing what it was in a conquest of power, the achievement of which would make it possible to abolish class society, and thus bring man's prehistory to a close. This is the basis of the formation of the identity of the working class. It's how people understand themselves as workers, and so in Marxist terms, this is the class in itself becoming the class for itself. This is the identity that produces the workers' movement. It's the expression of what people believe about themselves. Now, there are ingrained ideological assumptions here that go sort of beyond pure arguments about class, right? This is an argument about a very specific kind of factory worker. And in some sense, I think the focus on the factory worker as like the sort of emblematic like bearer of this, and this is true both of the theorist of the time and from people like EndNotes who are looking back on it from like 100 years later. I think this is kind of a distraction from what a lot of the actual base of the workers' movement is, which is to say like coal miners and workers involved in energy logistics. You could take, for example, like the beating heart of the anarchist movement in much of the 20s and 30s are these Andalusian coal miners whose militancy and ability to sort of control the supply of coal that, the capitalist class relied on for production gave them enormous leverage. And as the historian Timothy Mitchell has argued, it was this sort of capacity to, break the economy through shutting off the coal supply through strikes and sabotage, which workers at the time like think of like the strike as a kind of sabotage. And it's this capability that informs a lot of the sort of politics and sense of possibility of the 20th century workers' movement. And, given what the people who are like, working in a coal mine or like, are like a dock worker or, it's like if you are working in a factory, right? It makes sense that these people believe this, right? In terms of, if you're looking at something like, workers are building the new world with their hands, right? Or like we are the only social group that's expanding. We're the only people who are like capable of like managing the new world according to its own logic. This makes a lot of sense if you are one of the people who live in a world that has effectively disappeared now. And that is a world where you literally are watching cities be constructed out of like, the tiny shells of villages, right? The only way you can sort of experience that now is if you were one of the people in sort of the 90s and the 2000s in China who, like watched Shenzhen turn from a fishing village into one of the largest cities in the world. But that's not really a thing anymore. But on the other hand, like this is what these people are experiencing. And this is a group of people who can literally feel in their hands the sort of the power and the value of the labor in what they're producing. They can see commodities appear in the world and they can know that it was, by their hands that the world was built. And this is not purely a metaphor, right? These are people who are literally creating the world around them. To quote one of the verses of Solidarity Forever that modern trade unions hilariously notably do not include in the version of the song that they tend to sing at things, the trade union version drops a bunch of verses, and one of those verses is, "In our hands is placed a power greater than their hoarded gold, greater than the might of armies, multiplied 1,000-fold. We can bring to birth a new world from the ashes of the old, for the union makes us strong." And this is both the positive vision of the workers' movement and its own sort of theoretical self-conception wrapped into one. It is the sort of rosy romantic picture of what the workers' movement is. However, this is the incredibly romantic version of this. And before we sort of leave the world of pure romance and go into the sort of dirty and grimy world of reality where everything kind of sucks and things are not what they normally seem, we are going to take an ad break. And we're back. Now, there are a lot of things about this workers' movement that if you just sort of look at it theoretically, or if you're looking at one of the sort of like incredibly sort of rosy self-caricatures, I guess, if you're purely looking at the kind of propaganda that the movement produces in order to create itself, you are going to get a very distorted picture of sort of what was actually going on the ground. And this also makes it very, very difficult to understand what happened, because, you know, if you want to understand how this movement was defeated and how all of the sort of branches of the workers' movement, like all of its different ideologies, all of its different manifestations are just essentially destroyed, you have to get to the point where you start to realize that the ideological conception of productivity, right, of the producer, of, you know, like of what the worker is, was never as sort of dry and objective as theorists wanted us. And, you know, you get the sense that they wanted like themselves to believe. Case in point is the nature of what Marx calls the lumpen proletariat. So here's from Endnotes again. Who were these lumpen proletarians preaching anarchy? Attempts to spell that out usually took the form not of structural analysis, but rather of long lists of shady characters, lists which collapsed in on themselves in a frenzied incoherence. Here is Marx's paradigmatic discussion of the lumpen proletariat from the 18th Brumaire of Louis Bonaparte. On the pretext of founding a benevolent society, the lumpen proletariat of Paris had been organized into secret sections, each section led by Bonapartist agents. These lumpen supposedly consisted of, quote, vagabonds, discharged soldiers and jailbirds, escaped galley slaves, swindlers, mountebanks, lazarani, pickpockets, tricksters, gamblers, pimps, brothel keepers, porters, literati, organ grinders, rag pickers, knife grinders, tinkers, beggars, in short, the whole indefinite disintegrating mass, thrown hither and thither, from which the French call la bohème. Is there any truth in this paranoid fantasy? Do escaped convicts and organ grinders share a common counter-revolutionary interest with beggars, which distinguishes them from the common mass worker, who are apparently revolutionary by nature? To think so is insane. The lumpen proletariat was a specter haunting the workers' movement. If that movement constituted itself for the dignity of workers, then the lumpen was the figure of the undignified worker, or more accurately, the lumpen was one of its figurations. All of the movement's efforts to give dignity to the class were supposedly undermined by these dissolute figures, drunks singing in the streets, petty criminals, and prostitutes. References to the lumpen proletariat registered what was a simple truth. It was difficult to convince workers to organize as workers, since mostly they didn't care about socialism. A great many of the poor, especially the very poor, did not think or behave themselves as proletarians, or find the organizations and modes of actions of the movement as applicable or relevant to them. In their free time, they'd rather go to the pub than sing workers' songs. In the figure of the lumpen, we discover the dark underside of the affirmation of the working class. It was a biting class hatred. Workers saw themselves as originating out of a stinking morass. From Kautsky's The Class Struggle, quote, at the time of the beginning of modern industry, the term proletariat implied absolute degeneracy, and there are persons who believe this is still the case. Moreover, capitalism was trying to push them back into the muck. Thus, the crisis tendencies of capitalism could only be resolved in one of two ways: the victory of the working class, or in its becoming lumpen. Now, you can see a couple of things very clearly here. One is there's been a lot of attempts to resuscitate the lumpen proletariat as a functional class. Especially, you see this especially in the 70s, and I really would recommend those people go back and read what Marx actually wrote about the lumpen proletariat, because it makes no sense. It is just absolute sort of blithering nonsense. And the reason it's this kind of incredibly bizarre, paranoid, list of fantasies is that beneath the sort of faux scientific objectiveness, of the workers' movement is this incredibly petty moralism and a set of sort of Victorian social values with all of the sort of cruelty of the aristocratic masters. And I want to sort of point out here, this kind of thinking, this kind of we are the movement that is a liberation of the class, but in order to do that, we need to prove that we are actually sort of real dignified human beings, and that there's another group of people who are just us, but we hate them because they don't behave the way that we think they're supposed to. This is a very, very common thing that you see in basically all social movements. especially in their earliest and like shittiest iterations. You see this in the early feminist movement. I mean, you see this still in the feminist movement, but there are sections of it that do this too. There's a really good piece called Some Like It Hot by Sophie Lewis about the sort of feminist reaction to Marilyn Monroe. And I'm going to read a little bit from it. One of the things that you get the sense of is that people like Gloria Steinem just absolutely hate Marilyn Monroe. And the stuff they write about her is stuff that like it would be like almost incomprehensible to imagine any of these people, or even just sort of like, not even like a modern sort of like conservative, like writing on purpose about a woman and being allowed to sort of get away with it. I mean, they write just horrible things about her. I'm going to read a little bit from that piece. Perhaps it was Monroe's dumping of 3 husbands, 2 of them were famous and powerful, that posed, quote, no adult challenge to Steinem's mind. Or perhaps Steinem's comments closed nothing so much as her own inability to see high femme people as subjects. Here, in case it might pierce the veil, is Monroe apogem, written on Waldorf Astoria letter paper in 1955. Quote, everyone has violence in themselves. I am violent. Here is another, spoken to photographer Bruno Bernard in 1956. Both the anti-communists on the House Committee on Un-American Activities and the movie censors on the production board should be buried alive. Perhaps Steinem, who proudly worked for the CIA in the 50s and 60s, would not appreciate this kind of courage. The courage of one Norma who, when notified by the police at a Los Angeles roadblock in 1949 that a nearby house was being monitored for ties to communists, shouted the officer's ear off and went straight to tip off blacklisted screenwriters Norma and Ben Bowersman. And so, you can sort of see what's happening here, right? It's a very similar thing where there are these sort of like, you have these very sort of like respectable mainstream feminists who look at someone like Marilyn Monroe who, and they just fucking hate her. They absolutely despise her because she is sort of, she is the image of what they sort of think that they're fighting against, right? Like they're what liberation looks like for them is to like not be this kind of woman. And that's, that's the sort of unspoken or sometimes just overly spoken core of what a lot of this stuff is. And, this is how these people like can justify like working for the fucking CIA, right? And, somehow claiming themselves to be like superior feminist to Marilyn Monroe, who, at like great personal cost and at great danger, like, fought HUAC and shit. So, this kind of like, we are the group who is going to free our own group. We're also not like, because we're not like those other people who are literally the same as us, but we don't like them because we don't think they're respectable enough. This is a very, very old sort of trend, but it has real social consequences. And it's a really disastrous strategy because it means that all of these movements have these sort of flanks from which they can be attacked. One of these flanks for the workers' movement, and one that's become increasingly important now, is the kind of producerist conception of what a worker is. This is the man sort of creating the new world with his bare hands. The problem is that, this is never what most labor actually was. Here's David Graeber again. In fact, there was never a time when most workers worked in a factory. Even in the days of Karl Marx or Charles Dickens, working-class neighborhoods housed far more maids, bootblacks, dustmen, cooks, nurses, cabbies, schoolteachers, prostitutes, caretakers, and costermongers than employees in coal mines, textile mills, or iron foundries. Are these former jobs productive? In what sense and for whom? Who produces the souffle? It is because of these ambiguities that such issues are typically brushed aside when people are arguing about value. But doing so blinds us to the reality that most working class labor, whether carried out by men or women, actually resembles what we archetypically think of as women's work: looking after people, seeing to their wants and needs, explaining, reassuring, anticipating what the boss wants or is thinking, not to mention caring for, monitoring, and maintaining plants, animals, machines, and other objects. Then it involves hammering, carving, hoisting, or harvesting things. And, you can see in this sort of issue, right, you can see the axis upon which the workers' movement is going to be split in the 80s and 90s. If you can convince a set of workers that what they're doing is, masculine productive labor, right, and that, what those other people are doing is this like feminine care labor that doesn't produce anything, you can turn the entire ideology of the workers' movement on its head and transform it from a liberatory ideology about the end of the class system to a patriarchal ideology about the necessity of labor to sort of manhood and masculinity. And once that ideological shift is made, you can start writing off entire fields of labor as being insufficiently quote unquote productive. Or, as the right-wing shift renders it, you can say productive and mean insufficiently masculine to count as part of like the working class TM. This problem, as Graeber argues, is a consequence of the sort of maniacal focus on production that defined the workers' movement, because it obscures the fact that, again, most of actual labor is care labor. And this is something we've discussed at length on this show in sort of ethnographic, if not theoretical terms, while talking to Starbucks workers. And in these conversations, it becomes almost immediately clear that a huge part of the job has, very little to do with making coffee, or even sort of classical customer management and like the interpretive and emotional labor of doing service work. What these workers are actually doing is acting as a replacement for the collapsing American social safety net, right? They are taking care of and literally saving the lives of people who capitalism has spat out and left to die. And this is by any actual, I'm not going to say objective standard, because I don't think there is an objective standard for how much work something is. But, in terms of the amount of labor, in terms of the difficulty of labor, in terms of like what is being expected of these workers, this is incredibly intense, difficult labor. But, because of the sort of patriarchal like idea and conception that has sort of consumed what our sort of collective conception of what a quote unquote real job is, the enormous amount of care labor that baristas do every day. And, there's a good argument. Graeber makes a very similar argument to this, that you can look at the entire job and you can look at like most economic production as care labor, right? Because you're producing this coffee in order to care for someone. You make a bridge in order to in order so that people can use it, right? But there's a good argument that like everything a barista does is care labor, but because it's not like making cars or being one of the last 50,000 coal miners left in the US, it's not considered real labor. And all of this is just a bomb that is left sitting under the ideological core of the workers' movement. And that bomb probably would have just gone off on its own. I say on its own. That bomb probably would have been set off by something we're going to talk about more tomorrow, which is the shift in the labor force in a lot of countries that sort of deindustrialized towards this kind of labor being the sort of standard, being just even more obviously the standard form of labor. But the ruling class figured out a way to sort of set this bomb off and ensure that and ensure that it would, just detonate the workers' movement immediately. And the thing that they figured out to set this bomb off is racism. And that is what I'm going to talk about tomorrow. The story of how the fusion of racism and sexism that may well be remembered by historians as the force that burned the entire world, consumed what was left of the workers' movement, and turned this country into neoliberal Reagan hell.
Support for the show comes from Public, the investing platform for those who take it seriously. On Public, you can build a multi-asset portfolio of stocks, bonds, options, crypto, and now generated assets, which allow you to turn any idea into an investable index with AI. It all starts with your prompt. From renewable energy companies with high free cash flow to semiconductor suppliers growing revenue over 20% year over year, you can literally type any prompt and put the AI to work. It screens thousands of stocks, builds a one-of-a-kind index, and lets you backtest it against the S&P 500. Then you can invest in a few clicks. Generated assets are like ETFs with infinite possibilities, completely customizable and based on your thesis, not someone else's. Go to public.com/podcast and earn an uncapped 1% bonus when you transfer your portfolio. That's public.com/podcast. Paid for by Public Investing. Brokerage services by Open to the Public Investing Inc. Member FINRA and SIPC. Advisory services by Public Advisors LLC, SEC registered advisor. Generated assets is an interactive analysis tool. Output is for informational purposes only and is not an investment recommendation or advice. Complete disclosures available at public.com/disclosures.
Time for a sofa upgrade? Introducing Anabay Sofas, where designer style meets budget-friendly prices. Anabay brings you the ultimate in furniture innovation with a modular design that allows you to rearrange your space effortlessly. Perfect for both small and large spaces, Anabay is the only machine-washable sofa inside and out. Say goodbye to stains and messes with liquid and stain-resistant fabrics that make cleaning easy. Liquids simply slide right off. Designed for custom comfort, our high-resilience foam lets you choose between a sink-in feel or a supportive memory foam blend. Plus, our pet-friendly, stain-resistant fabrics ensure your sofa stays beautiful for years. Don't compromise quality for price. Visit washablesofas.com to upgrade your living space today. Sofas start at just $699 with no risk returns and a 30-day money-back guarantee. Get up to 60% off, plus free shipping and free returns. Shop now at washablesofas.com. Offers are subject to change and certain restrictions may apply.
Hey, this is U.S. Olympic gold medalist Tara Davis Woodhull.
And I'm U.S. Paralympic gold medalist Hunter Woodhull.
As athletes, our lives are about having a clear path.
And a team that you can absolutely trust.
So when it came to getting the best mortgage,
we chose PennyMac.
PennyMac is proud to be the official mortgage provider of Team USA and you.
Learn more at pennymac.com. PennyMac Loan Services, LLC, Equal Housing Lender, NMLS ID 35953. Licensed by the Department of Financial Protection and Innovation under the California Residential Mortgage Lending Act. Conditions and restrictions may apply.
Hi everyone, it's me, James, and I'm coming at you today sweaty, smelly, and exhausted from my pickup truck out in the desert where I have been spending the weekend trying my best to help, along with lots of other dedicated mutual aid workers, to mitigate the damage done by an entirely preventable humanitarian crisis at the United States southern border. People are being held in the open desert in Jacumba, where it gets hot in the day, gets very cold at night, and there are children, there are old people, there are young people. All the support they're getting is from mutual aid workers. They maybe get some water from Border Patrol, from federal government, and not much else. And I'm here before your podcast to ask you if you can to help. We've all spent all of our time and most of our money the last few days, week, trying to help. And we're all pretty broke and we're all pretty tired, but I could really do with your support. And I'm going to give the Venmos and Cash Apps and PayPal information for two organizations who I dearly love and whose work I have seen is extremely effective and is the only thing keeping this situation from being a lot worse. And please don't think that if you don't have much money that you shouldn't give. We can do a lot with a little. So if you only have $5, that is great. $5 is a tarp for someone to sleep under or a few hot meals. And what we're going to buy is food, blankets, tarps, water, the things that stop people dying in the desert. Those two organizations, Border Kindness and Free Ship Collective, can be found online at Border Kindness and at Free Ship PB on Twitter. For Border Kindness, the Venmo is at border-kindness. The Cash App is $Border Kindness Cash, and the Zelle and PayPal information is info@borderkindness.org. Free Ship Collective are at Free Ship Collective on Cash App and PayPal, and at Free Ship PB on Twitter. Thank you very much, guys.
Welcome to It Could Happen Here, a podcast about why everything absolutely sucks. I'm your host, Mia Wong. I'm back again, and last episode we talked about the problems with conceiving of all of labor as production from a sort of macro-feminist perspective of, thinking about how, thinking of all labor as production doesn't actually capture what most labor is. And, we looked at how this allowed patriarchy to become a wedge to pry the workers' movement apart. But there's another sort of more micro problem with thinking about productive labor. And that micro problem is that people are just absolutely unable to think about productivity in anything other than moral terms. As to, why this is the case, I'm not going to put forward an answer. I've seen every theory from it's Christianity to it's a structural feature of capitalism to it's human nature or whatever. I don't know. Pick your theory about why everyone is incapable of being normal about productivity. But this turns out to be a real problem for anyone who is trying to use productive versus unproductive labor in a purely technical sense. Now, the most famous person to do this is, as some of you probably know, one Karl Marx. And, you know, I was hard on Marx last episode, but this one and the stuff that's going to follow isn't really his fault. Marx here is actually doing one of the times where he's being very reasonable and he's being very specific about what productive labor is, and everyone else is being extremely unreasonable. And, you know, given the incredibly dark places this is going to go, maybe this is one of those things where, like, I don't know, you need to pick different words that aren't as emotionally charged as like productive and unproductive labor. But all in all, like this, the catastrophe that's about to unfold is not Marx's fault. There was really no way that he could have known how nuts everyone was going to go over this. So what actually is the distinction between productive and unproductive labor for Marx? So first off, and this is very important, productive versus unproductive labor is a technical term. It has no moral content at all. All it means is that some labor produces capital for the capital owning class and some labor doesn't. That's literally it. Here's Marx. The commodities the capitalist buys for his own private consumption are not consumed productively. They do not become factors of capital. Just as little do the services he buys for his consumption, voluntarily or through compulsion from the state, etc., for the sake of their use value. They do not become a factor of capital. They are not, therefore, productive kinds of labor, and those who perform them are not productive workers. As you can see, this has literally nothing to do with the content of the labor itself or morality whatsoever. If a dancer works for a production company and gives a performance, you know, working for the company, that's productive labor because the company has turned their capital into more capital by using the dancer to produce a commodity, which is, you know, the performance, and then selling it, right? If that same dancer puts on the same performance in the same place for a crowd of, you know, just like their friends or even the same people, but who aren't paying a production company for it, suddenly the dancer, who again is doing the same thing in the same place, like even could be on the same day, is doing non-productive labor because no capital is being created from it. Or as, you know, here's how Marx puts it, labor with the same content can therefore be both productive and unproductive. Milton, for example, who did Paradise Lost, was an unproductive worker. In contrast to this, the writer who delivers hack work for his publisher is a productive worker. Later on, Milton sold the product for $5 and to that extent became a dealer in a commodity. But the Leipzig literary proletarian who produces books, e.g., Compendium Political Economy, at the instruction of his publisher is roughly speaking a productive worker, insofar as his production is subsumed under capital and only takes place for the purpose of the latter's valorization. This is a valorization of capital, which is like having capital make more capital. A singer who sings like a bird is an unproductive worker. If she sells her singing for money, she is to that extent a wage laborer or a commodity dealer. But the same singer, when she is engaged by an entrepreneur who has her sing in order to make money, is a productive worker, for she directly produces capital. A schoolmaster who educates others is not a productive worker, but a schoolmaster who is engaged as a wage laborer in an institution along with others in order through his labor to valorize the money of the entrepreneur of the knowledge-mongering institution is a productive worker. Now, okay, I'm reading a lot of Marx here. I'm focusing on Marx, you know, because whether or not someone in you know, the 1800s is a Marxist or not, and if you pick just like a random worker in the period when this is being written, the odds are really bad that they're going to be a Marxist. Marx was enormously influential, particularly in Europe, as sort of social democracy swept through the Germanys, and then communism sort of swept back through Europe and the US. And Marx is also, and this is something that Marx himself like takes great pains to conceal a lot of the time, Marx is a kind of medium through which the broad cultural consensus on labor was transformed into like capital T theory. And in this capital T theory, productive versus unproductive labor is not a moral claim at all. It's a measure of whether any given labor produces capital for the bourgeoisie. Now, part of what Marx is trying to do here is to intervene in existing discourse about productive and unproductive labor to turn it into useful theory instead of people just yelling stuff at each other. And Marx, I feel you, buddy. Oh boy. taking this as a validation of what I'm doing. Here's an example I'm just going to put in here of Marx being very mad about this. The self-employed laborer, for example, is his own wage laborer, and his own means of production confront him in his own mind as capital. As his own capitalist, he employs himself as a wage laborer. Anomalies of this type then offer a favorable field for outpourings of drivel about productive and unproductive labor. So, even in the 1800s, people are being incredibly normal about this. They're saying things that are great and good, and only that. They're being exceptionally good. Marx isn't slowly being driven mad by reading it all. But, when it's being used as a technical category, the sort of productive versus unproductive distinction, it can tell you a lot of stuff about how a capitalist economy functions. But when it inevitably becomes a moral category, things get very bad very quickly. And so we're going to go into 2 times that this has gone very badly. The Nazis and Ronald Reagan. Now, the Nazis and Reagan aren't quite doing the same thing, although there's a lot of similarities, which is, to be expected from a band who went to a Nazi cemetery that included a bunch of SS dudes, and then gave a speech defending his actions where he said, and I quote, they, which is referring to Nazi soldiers, quote, they were victims just as surely as the victims in the concentration camps. Which what the fuck? What are you even supposed to do with that? This guy was the president of the United States. I mean, I don't know. It makes sense, but it never even crossed my mind that it was it would even be possible to have a take that is people in the Nazi army are actually just as much victims as the people in the concentration camps. I don't know. Baffling stuff by Reagan. I mean, I guess not baffling considering how closely his administration is tied to a bunch of sort of Nazis who became anti-communists. Well, who were always anti-communists, but who became part of sort of institutional anti-communism in the post-war era. But God, what a terrible thing. I'm getting my shots in at Reagan now because this is about to get so incredibly bleak. So yay. So, okay, so the right is able to sort of, very successful, in fact, in transforming this distinction between productive and non-productive labor into a moral category. And then they infuse it with anti-Semitism. And through this sort of, I don't know, the horror of anti-Semitism, productive labor is transformed into, productive and unproductive members of society. And this is one of the origins of sort of Nazi race science and racecraft. They have their attempt to quote unquote purify their race, which relies on a distinction between sort of productive and non-productive members of society whose quote unquote value and productive capacity, come to be seen as genetically heritable, which, from the Nazi perspective, they are oh, this stuff is heritable. We need to do eugenics and mass exterminations of, increasing numbers of disabled, queer, communist, and especially Jewish and Roma people to ensure that only the quote unquote productive members of society remain and pass down their traits. And this is fucking horrible, but this is also too simple of an explanation for what actually happened. In order to actually fully grasp the depths of what's happening here and how this stuff functions, we need to go deeper into specifically looking at anti-Semitism. And in order to do this, I'm going to turn to the great sort of the great social theorist Moishe Postone, rest in peace, died a few years ago. Apparently a great guy. I don't know. But yeah, Postone and his essay, Anti-Semitism and National Socialism. This is something I recommend people read it in full. It's a bit theoretically intense. It's also one of the most heartbreaking things I've ever read. But I think it's important to understand what National Socialism actually was and what its sort of ideological basis was, because it, oh boy, not only has it not gone away, it's doing a lot of the sort of work that we've been sort of discussing. Okay, so what is Pistone actually talking about? So Pistone sees Nazi anti-Semitism not just as, the sort of socialism of fools where like Jewish people get substituted for capitalists to deceive the worker. And okay, like, yeah, it's like it serves its function to some extent. But for Pistone, like Nazi anti-Semitism is its own sort of horrific, incomplete anti-capitalist system. It's this sort of ghastly Aryan mirror of like Marxism. And, okay, so to get an understanding of what he means by this, because this is something that is, like it's deeply, it's kind of theoretically intense, but it's worth it. So in Marxism, the central mystery of the commodity is that a commodity is central mystery isn't the right word, but this is one of the opening things in Capital is that, This is this thing called the commodity fetish. You have a commodity. A commodity is simultaneously a concrete physical object that nonetheless contains within it an abstract social relation. It has at the same time a use value, which is like, the thing that makes it useful, right? Like take a pencil, right? Pencil, it has a use value. The use value is that you can like use it to write things, right? And you can use it to erase things. But the pencil also has an exchange value. And the exchange value, is the value, quote unquote, that you use to compare it to other commodities, right? It's like, how much is this thing worth? How much is this compared to like other commodities? That's kind of a simplification of it. But what's happening here is that the sort of the exchange value that lets you compare how much a pencil is worth to how much a bracelet is worth, right? That's not an actual characteristic of the pencil or the bracelet. That is a serious, that's an embedded social relation, right? It's an embedded capitalist social relation that allows a commodity to be compared to all other commodities by, again, like embedding this capitalist social relation into it. The important part for our purposes is that the commodity has at the same time a concrete component, which is the physical object, and an abstract component, which is the sort of capitalist social relation embedded in the pencil that makes it appear to have value. Here's Pistone. As indicated above, on the logical level of the analysis of the commodity, the quote double character allows the commodity to appear as a purely material entity rather than as an objectification of mediated social relations. So this is a more complicated way of saying what I've sort of been trying to get at, which is that the commodity, because it's a physical object, right? The commodity fetish allows the commodity to appear as if it's just a pure physical object instead of something that is produced by capitalism and contains within it capitalist social relations that give it value. So we'll back to Pistone. Relatedly, it allows concrete labor to appear as a purely material creative process, separate from capitalist social relations. On the logical level of capital, the double character, labor process and valorization process, and by valorization process, he means the process that turns, capital into more capital. So the fact that there's both a labor process and a valorization process allows industrial production to appear as a purely material creative process, separable from capital. The manifest form of the concrete is now more organic. Industrial capital can then appear as linear descendant of, quote, natural artisanal labor, as, quote, organically rooted in opposition to, like, rootless, quote, parasitic finance capital. You can see here where the whole sort of productive versus unproductive labor distinction has ended up, right? It's been transformed into the sort of organic, concrete, rooted, like productive national worker and like entrepreneur versus like rootless, parasitic finance capital. This is unbelievably dangerous because now having set the concrete against the abstract, the fascist proceeds to turn the abstract into a people, which is Jewish people. The result of this is that in the fascist mind, the sort of concrete productive worker and the entrepreneur stand against the abstract anti-national finance capital, personified in the figure of the Jew. Here's Pistone again at what happened next. The extermination of European Jewry is the indication that it is far too simple to deal with Nazism as a mass movement with anti-capitalist overtones which shed that husk in the 1934 Rome push. At the latest, once it had served its purpose and state power had been seized. In the first place, ideological forms of thought are not simply conscious manipulations. In the second place, this view misunderstands the nature of Nazi, quote, anti-capitalism, the extent to which it was intrinsically bound to the anti-Semitic worldview. Auschwitz indicates that connection. It is true that the somewhat too concrete and plebeian quote-unquote anti-capitalism of the SA was dispensed with by 1934. Not, however, the anti-Semitic thrust, the knowledge, quote-unquote, that the source of evil is abstract, the Jew. A capitalist factory is a place where value is produced, which, unfortunately, has to take the form of the production of goods, of use values. The concrete is produced as the necessary carrier of the abstract. The extermination camps were not a terrible version of the factory. The extermination camps were not a terrible version of such a factory, but rather should be seen as its grotesque, Aryan, quote, anti-capitalist negation. Auschwitz was a factory to, quote-unquote, destroy value. That is, to destroy the personifications of the abstract. Its organization was that of a fiendish industrial process, the aim of which was to liberate the concrete from the abstract. The first step was to dehumanize, that is, to rip away the quote-unquote mask of humanity, of qualitative specificity, and reveal the Jews for, quote, what they really are, shadows, ciphers, numbered abstractions. The second step was to then eradicate that abstractness, to transform it into smoke, trying in the process to wrest away the last remains of the concrete material use value, clothes, gold, hair, soap. Auschwitz, not the Nazi seizure of power in 1933, was the real German Revolution, the attempted overthrow, not merely of a political order, but of the existing social formation. By this one deed, the world was to be made safe from the tyranny of the abstract. In the process, the Nazis, quote-unquote, liberated themselves from humanity. The Nazis lost the war against the Soviet Union, America, and Britain. They won their war, their revolution, against the European Jews. And this ideology, this pitting of the abstract against the concrete, is so powerful that it was never defeated. By the time the Nazis were defeated militarily, they had, by the combined might of 5 of the largest empires in human history, they had already won. And their ideology never went away. If you look closely, you can still see it moving throughout the world. You can see it in the left making exactly the same mistakes it made before, waging war against the abstract in the name of an anti-capitalism that can never end with the actual destruction of capitalism in that specific form. You can see it in a right that openly espouses these exact same ideas in the form of pitting their nationalists and patriots against the globalists, in the way it pits national American or Russian or Hungarian workers against George Soros. It is the basis of all modern right-wing thought. And when we come back from ads, we are going to talk about right-wing thought's other basis, Ronald Reagan's rampant racism. We've now seen one way that the productive and unproductive worker distinction can be turned into unfathomable right-wing violence. And now we're going to take a look at another one, which is the myth of the welfare queen. So one of the ways that Reagan eventually took power was by, literally, he was doing this for like a decade. He does it for like 20 fucking years. It's insufferable. He's screaming about the myth of the welfare queen. So the welfare queen, for people who we're too young to remember what I wasn't around for the original height of it, but I fucking remember it from when I was a kid. It's this sort of mythical racist caricature of a black woman who lives off of scamming the welfare system. And you can see what's happening here pretty clearly, right? This is not a particularly subtle political maneuver. The plan is to pit, sort of so-called productive workers and entrepreneurs versus people on welfare. And through the sort of incredible power of racism and specifically misogynoir, which is, through the power of America's just like specific abiding hatred of black women, the identity of the worker is transformed into a racial category. So what you're actually dealing with is this opposition Reagan is trying to create between quote unquote like productive white people who like work for a living or whatever, and black welfare queens, quote unquote, who are dependent on the state and don't work. And this is sort of Reagan's framing of it. Now, if you go back to the sort of older Marxist conception of class, right? Like unemployed black people are like unambiguously part of the working class. And this is something that Reagan understood. Now, part of what was going on here actually was Reagan attempting to sort of crack down on black welfare activists who were doing a lot of, really incredible organizing, ranging from sort of like, organizing mass protests to like doing squats to doing like full on building occupations. And Reagan, and more so the people sort of around Reagan by the end, because, by term 2, Reagan has like basically checked out, but the people around Reagan can see which way the wind is blowing. And, they are busy sort of like lining up every fan they can find to make the wind blow a bit stronger. And the way that the winds are blowing is that a bunch of people are about to be spat out of the capitalist system into increasingly precarious service jobs or just no jobs at all. And as the sort of crisis dynamics emerged and intensified, and people tend to forget this, but Reagan's term started with him nuking the economy, setting off a recession, and jacking employment up to 10%. But, as this unfolds, Reagan sees a perfect opportunity to sever what Marx would call the Industrial Reserve Army, who are, all the people who've been spat out of the capitalist system and forced to face sort of precarity and unemployment. He sees an opportunity to split these people from workers who held on to their jobs. And the way you do this is by talking about class in a way that's really about race. This new sort of moral division of like productive and non-productive worker is incredibly racialized, which is to say that it's just really racist. There's no sort of, I don't know, there's no, I'm not going to do the circumlocution on that shit. It is really racist, and it's specifically designed to pit white workers against black workers. And it's also, this is something we should point out here, like reality has no effect on the sort of the actual propaganda value, but like the people who are on welfare who are working, like they're working a lot, they're working really shit jobs, they're working more than the people who aren't on welfare in a lot of cases. What's happening here, right, is this entire thing is very specifically designed to pit white workers against black workers by invoking racial prejudice, and slightly more subtly, it's designed to remove black workers from the category of labor altogether through, the sort of means of America's like deep and abiding hatred of black women. Now, back in sort of reality, and again, bearing in mind, reality has no effect on this bullshit, but, back in reality, like the actual biggest welfare cheat of the modern era is Brett Favre, former quarterback of the Minnesota Vikings. Please send all complaints at iWriteOK on Twitter. Favre managed to spend $77 million of welfare money on a bunch of bullshit that includes like trying to get a multi-million-dollar volleyball facility built at his daughter's school. The actual woman who was like the model for the first like welfare queen thing, like may have stolen $8,000. But, this doesn't matter at all because, again, like reality's ability to combat propaganda is incredibly weak. And, and the other thing that's important to understand about this, right, is this was never actually about the money. And this is something that people use to try to combat this stuff, right? Which people will point out, and they're right, that in order to like quote unquote combat welfare fraud, like you spend more money trying to combat the fraud than you save on the fraud. But that's not the point. That's not the point at all. The point is, again, like turning white workers against black workers who happen to be unemployed. And it works incredibly well because they tap into two just really powerful wells of emotion, racism, and they tap into a second one, which is people hating work. But because this is the right, the way they tap into people hating work was they transform it into the seething hatred and resentment at the possibility of someone not having to have the suffering that you have and doing the thing that you always want to do, which is not work, and then tying that to, oh, these people don't have to suffer the way that I do because they're living off of like the product of my labor. And, you know, you can see the sort of ghosts, right, of like an anti-capitalist critique of labor, which is like, yeah, there are a bunch of people who like don't work a fucking day in their lives off the proceeds of our labor. They wear a bunch of suits and they you know, they're like 17th generation, like descendants of the Walton family or whatever. But, you know, this is the sort of right-wing version of it. And so through the sort of lens of racism and through the sort of transformation of class and productivity, like into sort of like pure race discourse, they've managed to sort of, you know, they've managed to completely transform the way people think about class. And this is a big part of the reason why the way Americans think about class is so incredibly messed up. And it's a big part of the reason why, you know, the United States has spent the next 50 years doing this unbelievably merciless, like ruthless purge and just like mass infliction of suffering on the poorest people in the US. It's because of this shit. And this is also the reason that no one, you know, if you're fucking reading the New York Times, right, you will never hear anybody talk about black workers. They will only ever talk about white workers. And this is because that ideological project that Reagan was attempting to do, was a big part of it was, again, about an attempt to expel black workers from the popular collective imagination of the working class. And it fucking worked. If you're a white pundit, you can do this thing. You can make an entire career off of studying, quote unquote, the working class, only ever talk to white people because that's the only part of the working class that like exists to these people that they even will pretend matters. And then, you know, never mention black workers even existing at all, much less like engage with black workers as like core of the workers' movements. And no one outside of like actual leftist circles were even bat an eye. No one even thinks this is fucking weird, right? And you can get away with this shit because, you know, 80% of all discourse about class is really about race or gender. And, you know, 80% of all discourse about race is fucking white people talking to other white people. And that's where we're going to end for today. We will come back to the sort of ruling class reaction to this another time. But in the meantime, this has been Naked Happened Here. Go out into the world and make something that's not this one.
Support for the show comes from Public, the investing platform for those who take it seriously. On Public, you can build a multi-asset portfolio of stocks, bonds, options, crypto, and now generated assets, which allow you to turn any idea into an investable index with AI. It all starts with your prompt. From renewable energy companies with high free cash flow to semiconductor suppliers growing revenue over 20% year over year, you can literally type any prompt and put the AI to work. It screens thousands of stocks, builds a one-of-a-kind index, and lets you backtest it against the S&P 500. Then you can invest in a few clicks. Generated assets are like ETFs with infinite possibilities, completely customizable and based on your thesis, not someone else's. Go to public.com/podcast and earn an uncapped 1% bonus when you transfer your portfolio. That's public.com/podcast. Paid for by Public Investing. Brokerage services by Open to the Public Investing Inc. Member FINRA and SIPC. Advisory services by Public Advisors LLC, SEC registered advisor. Generated assets is an interactive analysis tool. Output is for informational purposes only and is not an investment recommendation or advice. Complete disclosures available at public.com/disclosures.
Tired of spills and stains on your sofa? Wash away your worries with Anabei. Anabei is the only machine washable sofa inside and out, where designer quality meets budget-friendly prices. That's right, sofas start at just $699. Enjoy a no-risk experience with pet-friendly, stain-resistant, and changeable slip covers made with performance fabric. Experience cloud-like comfort with high-resilience foam that's hypoallergenic and never needs fluffing. The sturdy steel frame ensures longevity, and the modular pieces can be rearranged anytime. Shop WashableSofas.com for up to 60% off site-wide, backed by a 30-day satisfaction guarantee. If you're not absolutely in love, send it back for a full refund. No return shipping or restocking fees. every penny back. Upgrade now at washablesofas.com. Offers are subject to change, and certain restrictions may apply.
Hey, this is U.S. Olympic gold medalist Tara Davis Woodhull.
And I'm U.S. Paralympic gold medalist Hunter Woodhull.
As athletes, our lives are about having a clear path.
And a team that you can absolutely trust.
So when it came to getting the best mortgage,
we chose PennyMac.
PennyMac is proud to be the official mortgage provider of Team USA and you.
Learn more at pennymac.com. PennyMac Loan Services, LLC, Equal Housing Lender, NMLS ID 35953. Licensed by the Department of Financial Protection and Innovation under the California Residential Mortgage Lending Act. Conditions and restrictions may apply.
Hey everybody, Robert Evans here. The episode you're about to hear was recorded late last night at like 2 a.m. Due to the time difference between me and Joe, who is based in Armenia. As you may have heard, Azerbaijan launched another attack on the independent Armenian majority region of Artsakh, which is in territory that Azerbaijan claims. Since we recorded this a couple hours after, the Artsakh Defense Forces have surrendered. There's currently negotiations and something that's being called a ceasefire, although there continue to be reports of shelling and other violent acts by the Azeri military. It's kind of unclear what is going to happen. Tens of thousands of frightened Armenians have crowded the airport out of Artsakh. The pictures are pretty stunning and sobering, out of fears that a genocide will be instituted against the Armenian populace in that area. The episode you're about to hear is Joe and I kind of talking earlier in the invasion, pretty soon after it happened, going over some of the history, what's going on now, fears for the future. So thought it was still valuable stuff, but I wanted to let you know the situation has advanced since we recorded this, as is often the case when you're talking about, unfolding events. So thank you. Hey everyone, welcome to It Could Happen Here, a podcast about it happening here. And unfortunately for our guest today, it is, again, this is not the first time that it has been happening where this person happens to live. Joe Kasabian. Joe, hey, how you doing, buddy?
Hey, Robert. It's I would like to say it's good to be back, but this tends to happen a lot.
We did, in between the first time you were on, or the last time you were on this show, and now, we had a surprise meeting in Dublin. That was a lovely time.
That is true.
Yeah. And now, Joe, you are a podcaster, a genocide expert and academic studying that, and also, the host of the Lions Led by Donkeys podcast, which is a lovely podcast. And you are based out of Yerevan, which is the capital of Armenia, which is a country that is not yet being invaded, but is also in another way is being invaded right now, right? Like it's a complicated situation. Basically, the gist of it is, folks, if you're kind of tuning in, there are a number of different little republics in the Caucasus region. And one of the, over the course of the last, couple of thousand years, there have been a lot of Armenian people in this area that we call the Caucasus, right? And, you have your, couple of thousand years of history, around the 11th century, you get, some claims start being made to this area in what is now called Karabakh, Artsakh. Now you've got this kind of area that is a Armenian majority region where the surrounding Azeri people argue that it is their land, their territory, that they should be allowed to take it. And there have been a series of wars that have been going on over this area since the fall of the Soviet Union. And now, as we are talking right now, Joe, you and I, the Azeri military has just launched a new invasion with the stated goal, really, of retaking this entire region, and potentially the goal of engaging the Armenian military in a wider formal way, right? That's at least the way the Azeris have discussed it. The Armenian government has said, this is not, Artsakh is not
Armenia. This is not like our troops and stuff on the ground here. But the Azeris have basically just said, like, we are disabling Armenian military equipment.
Yeah, it's it goes back to December of last year. I mean, obviously this goes back even before then, but if you start talking about, history, people's eyes are going to glaze over. The war that was fought in 2020, obviously Azerbaijan won, and ever since then, Karabakh or Artsakh has been cut off from the Republic of Armenia through this area called the Lashin Corridor, and according to the treaty, it was supposed to be maintained by Russian peacekeepers, but it never was. And specifically since December of 2022, Karabakh has been completely cut off by the Azeri and Russian military and is effectively being starved out. So it's been, quite a long time. And we knew, everybody knew the war was going to come again. But we kind of assumed it was going to be in 2025 when the Russians are mandated to leave. But it started yesterday. It started yesterday.
It seems like, I think the Azeris invaded right after about 23 tons, something like that, of essentially like bread was brought into across the Lachin corridor, right? So
literally
you've got
the next day.
this. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. This tiny amount of food makes it into this starving populace. And then the next day invasion starts.
Since December, they've done as much as they possibly could to turn Karabakh into what is effectively an open air concentration camp. And the military operation now, what it is, it to me is, it's a continuation of the 2020 war, because they couldn't conquer Stepanakert in 2020, which is the capital of Karabakh.
Yeah.
Due to external pressures as well as military capacity. Because during 2020, the Republic of Armenia, despite not legally directly fighting the war, was, of course, helping Karabakh with volunteers, soldiers, military supplies, everything.
Sure.
This time they can't. It's completely cut off. And this is not a war of any kind of near-peer powers. No. The local Karabakh Defense Force, called the Artsakh Defense Army, is a self-defense group. They have some heavy equipment, but the vast majority of it was destroyed in 2020. So this is, effectively like a local gun club trying to fight the U.S. Army.
This is more or less a militia going up against, the Azeris, one of their major suppliers of arms is Israel.
Israel and Turkey, as well as Russia.
Yeah.
Russia
as Russia as well, too.
Yeah.
And Russia is selling, obviously, to Armenia as well.
They actually aren't. We found out, I believe, last year. The government isn't the best at transparency. I feel like is the best way to word that. And we have been paying Russia for weapons since 2020. They have not delivered a single bullet since the last war.
Sorry, I should have said Armenia is paying Russia for weapons. Yeah.
Once again, we are being fucked by Russia. But it's as far as the stated Azeri goals are, they're very different. In 2020, when the war ended, they could frame it as a victory because they took over all these areas that they lost during the first war, minus about an area where about 120,000 people live in Stepanakert and the general outskirts there. But this time, the messaging is much different. It is, the government must collapse. They only gonna this is going quote unquote until the end, until they see a white flag from Stepanakert. So this is because now if they don't do that, they can't spin it as a victory.
Right.
And since December, the Lashin corridor has been shut for everybody. People couldn't leave. People who live in Karabakh, who are in Armenia for school or whatever, couldn't go back. And now suddenly yesterday, when the war started again, they are saying there's a humanitarian corridor through Lashin. So the goals are very, very clear here. And we know from their conduct in 2020, government propaganda, just the general attitude of the Azeri government towards Armenians, which is they can't exist here. This is a liquidation of the open air concentration camp that they've created.
So, Joe, first off, I guess what I want to ask is what is it like in Yerevan right now? because you are not far from where the fighting is continuing at the moment, but obviously Armenia is not technically involved at this point, right? Like that's at least according to the claims of the Armenian government. The Azeris allege that they are striking Armenian military targets right now. What is it like in Yerevan right now?
I think everybody is, I mean, you can see it on everybody's faces. Like they want information. They want to know what's going to happen next. There's a lot of protests yesterday and into the night because the prime minister came out and said, like, we're not going to get involved. And he's not exactly very popular, despite the fact he kind of is our best option at the moment. So there's a lot of, rightful anger towards him, towards Russia, towards the EU, you name it. Everybody's mad at everybody. So there's different protests. Yesterday, there was, fuck Russia protest. There was fuck Nikol Pashinyan, who's our prime minister protest. There was a combination of the two protest. They all kind of met in the middle. There was some fighting with the police. I heard reports that quite a few people tried to break into government buildings. That all seemed to have cooled off because I went down to the area where there was protesting and I didn't see any of that. But it seemed to have also started up again after I left. But again, it's only day one. People's anger is only going to get worse as the situation in Karabakh gets worse. The fall of Karabakh and Stepanakert, if and when that occurs, I have a hard time believing that the current government here in Armenia will survive. They'll either resign, be forced out. An unfortunate third option might happen, especially with the messaging coming from Russia, where they're blaming Armenia and specifically the prime minister for all of this. Because since September of last year, Armenia has been doing decent diplomacy in turning towards the West. There's American soldiers in the Republic of Armenia right now for training. Yes. We've sent supplies to Ukraine. We've all but left the CSTO, which is like Russia's shitty version of NATO.
Yeah.
So this is
clearly not very functional, right? Like,
yeah. I mean, this is a green lit punitive expedition on Russia's behalf, effectively.
Yeah, and this is a couple of things. So, like, obviously, the way in which the on paper alliances here kind of like chart out is not friendly to the sort of like soundbite media of our current day, right? Because Armenia, on paper, Armenia's like big supporter has been Russia recently, right?
As well as Azerbaijan. Like the day before Russia invaded Ukraine, they like cemented an alliance. But because Azerbaijan's been very overt, I guess you could say, and their support for Ukraine, giving them money and supplies here and there, non-military supplies, but humanitarian supplies.
Yeah,
this gets spun in the brain dead infosphere as it being like another Russian ally, that being Armenia is being invaded, or people equate Karabakh to Crimea and Ukraine's war goals. And since Azerbaijan is a PR ally of Ukraine and supplying the EU with gas and supplying the EU with Russian gas as well, it gets spun as like people are cheering for Azerbaijan, which is absolutely baffling to me. Like I wish I could say I'm confused or surprised, but like when you treat war like it's a team sport and you want to put on your favorite football jersey or whatever, like this is how it goes. When Karabakh declared independence from Azerbaijan during the Azeri Soviet Socialist Republic, when that was legal to do, and the state that they have created is one of the most free in the region, whereas Azerbaijan, according to like the Freedom Index, is 1 point above the Taliban-controlled Afghan state at the moment.
Yeah,
so I mean, like this is not a play. This is not like a liberation. A dictator cannot be a liberator.
No, and a lot of what is happening and why Azerbaijan is engaging in aggression right now is due to what's been happening to like the price of oil and like what that's done to the Azeri economy. Right, like this is it's a pretty standard page in the authoritarian playbook, right?
Of course. I mean, they're a classic fascist dictatorship insofar as every problem in the state that they have, of which they have many, because it's effectively a kleptocracy built around a petro dictatorship, is caused by Armenians. There, every single anti-Azeri piece that gets published in any media, and you can use the term anti-Azeri to mean like literally anything, is funded by the Armenian lobbying group, which, I mean, any Jewish conspiracy theory that we all know and hear about constantly in Azerbaijan, you just replace Jewish people with Armenians, and it's functionally the same thing. So, we're this global superpower with our tendrils and everything, but also we're weak and pitiful and need to be destroyed. It's same kind of messaging that we're used to hearing for like classic fascist propaganda. And as far as like why they're doing it now is because they've so ensconced themselves in the European good graces over the last little bit. They know nobody's going to stop them. The EU literally can't. And the United States, I mean, they're an outside player when it comes to European politics, at least internal politics. And they are only loosely connected to Azerbaijan. They do some military funding, but it's mostly to do with like these weird ghosts of the early global war on terror, where they're looking for friendly Muslim powers that would act as counter-terror forces. But Azerbaijan's secular. This war has nothing to do with us being Christian or them being Muslim. Though it does tend to be framed that way by the worst people imaginable.
It slots conveniently for a lot of people into those, but like this is, I mean, again, as I tried, and this is we're kind of like throwing this together in media res, but like this is we're talking about like this is the result of a very long period of conflict and movement of peoples in a region where they have been for thousands and thousands of years, right? Like that's like. It's not.
I would say the current conflict is mostly rooted in about the last 30, 35 years. I mean, the ancient history gets thrown around a lot by like propagandists, but this is a direct result of the Soviet Union's policies. It has nothing to do with like, the 1300s.
Would you take it back though to like World War I, right? Where you've got this like very brief period where like Azerbaijan and Armenia and Georgia all attempt to have this like almost little like Caucasus UN or EU of their own, right? And then they all get like gobbled up, over the course of the end of the war by Turkey and then by Russia. Like it's this like that's kind of where it all results from, right? At least that's my understanding of it.
If you want to go back that far, it has more of a result of early Soviet policy, and specifically Joseph Stalin before he took over the Soviet Union. He was the head of like the office of like minorities, effectively.
He
arbitrarily,
because he's a Georgian.
So is Beria. And he redrew the borders to include what is today Karabakh within the borders of what effectively would become the Azeri Soviet Socialist Republic. And during the entire period of the Soviet Union, which, a lot of people like to frame as this, there's no problems when the Soviet Union controlled these areas, which is, magical thinking.
There were protests by the Armenian populace, right? Like
there was a lot of protests during the 80s. You have what's called the Karabakh movement, wanted either A, Karabakh to become its own Soviet Socialist Republic, or B, to be given to the Armenian Soviet Socialist Republic and away from the Azeris. And failing that, they declared independence, which was within their rights under the Soviet Constitution, which did exist. I mean, it was largely fluid and completely ignored, as we see today. And that's what that triggered a lot of different pogroms between Azeris against the Armenian population within Azerbaijan, and Armenians did the same thing here as well. But that started the first war, which ended with Armenia winning and Artsakh becoming a de facto independent republic, not recognized by anybody, to include Armenia.
And it becomes at that point kind of one of a series of sort of little frozen wars during this kind of like early 90s period where the U.S.
there was some belief that the U.S. would act if like these conflicts got out of hand. That was like often proved wrong, right? Like
the best comparison is effectively Kosovo.
Yes,
the only difference is that because of geopolitics, you're getting involved in this war, whether it be in the 90s, in 2020, or today, it's not geopolitically advantageous. Like telling Azerbaijan to go fuck themselves by supporting Artsakh Armenians doesn't help anybody geopolitically. No. If it was Russia invading us, it would be raining weapons from the West, but geopolitically it doesn't benefit anybody to support us. And like there's this concept of like ethics and morals from superpowers, whether it be the bastion of democracy in the United States, or this concept of European ethics and morals in the EU. Like that's all propaganda vaporware. It's not real. If your country is being helped by any of these countries, it's because it benefits the countries that are helping you geopolitically. It's not because of they support whatever it is that you're doing. And because the Republic of Armenia itself is kind of in this situation as well, but the people of Artsakh are certainly in this situation.
And so, like right now, I mean, honestly, like what is there to do but watch, right? Like, is there? Do you have any kind of like hope for sort of positive, productive action at this point, or are we kind of stuck in this? We're going to see what the next chapter of this conflict looks like, as it kind of rolls out here.
Well, there's two options, really. Stop it through military force, or let the largest genocide of the 21st century go unimpeded.
Right.
Because the reason why our prime minister said that the Republic of Armenia is not going to get involved is because it literally cannot. We have Turkey on one border that will almost certainly be involved if we do. The Azeris also have guns pointed at our southern border, which they have said for years now they want to conquer. The Armenian military is not a superpower by any stretch of the imagination. And since we are not connected to Artsakh in any feasible way, it would require a massive counteroffensive to just relieve Stepanakert from the current siege, right? There's a reason why it didn't happen when they were being starved. So Armenia lacks the ability to stop this. However, there's multiple countries in the world, mostly France and the United States, that could end this in 5 seconds if they truly wanted to.
Yeah. You mentioned at the start that there are U.S. troops who are in Armenia right now, and my thoughts are drawn back to in 2019 when Turkey carried out an expanded invasion of some of the regions in northeast Syria that compose Rojava. And, U.S. peacekeepers pulled out previous to that. Now, the U.S. troops who were in Armenia were training. They were not there as peacekeepers, but...
Right. Like, they have no mandate to do anything. And there's only like 200 of them from some National Guard unit. It's not like it's a brigade combat team. And pressures, whatever you want to call them, are simply not going to happen. The European Union is not going to sanction Azerbaijan. They rely on their oil. And Azerbaijan has only become more powerful in this petro diplomacy since Russia invaded Ukraine. The United States has no functional sanctioning powers over Azerbaijan that could really affect them. And not to mention, as we've seen since the Russian invasion of Ukraine, sanctions don't stop wars.
Yeah. I mean, they never had, like, again, this is something the left is supposed to know, right? After like what happened with Iraq in the 90s, but like they don't do anything. Like,
no, of course not. Like, I mean, the only thing that stops a genocide is military force. And there's never been a genocide that has not ended from military force from one actor or another.
I might push even a little bit to say that, like, one thing that in this case I think could potentially at least reduce the risk of certain kinds of genocide is like keeping U.S. troops in the area, not even as like a viable combat force, but as a like, all right, Azerbaijan, if you are going to like disrupt the territorial integrity of the actual Armenian state, then we've got people who are in country and so you'll have to kill him, you know. And
that's something that
problem.
People have been arguing for a long time now. Not necessarily Americans exactly, but some kind of international peacekeeping mission, because we all knew that what Russia was doing, like this war benefits them as the previous instability in the region benefits them, because it allows them to have their hooks into Armenia, which is why we're kind of worried of what happens next here, because if Azerbaijan does complete the conquest of Stepanakert, which unless someone gets involved, they will.
Will.
I need to I need to be practical about these things. And once that happens, Russia won't have the sword of Damocles hanging over the Republic of Armenia's head anymore. So it does make us wonder, like, and everybody is very, very stupid if they think Azerbaijan stops with Artsakh.
Right.
I mean, in September of last year, when I was on your show, they were invading the Republic of Armenia. They were not invading Karabakh or Artsakh.
Yeah.
They were invading the Republic of Armenia. And their stated goals have not changed. The only thing that would happen is that this thorn in their side over the last 30 years would not be there anymore. They would have no impediments at all within what is considered their own borders. They could focus everything on the Republic of Armenia. So people who believe that this ends in Stepanakert, like, you only have to go back to this time last year to see that is not the case. The only thing that's going to happen is maybe they'll take a little bit of time. The war is coming to Armenia. This massacre will come across our borders. It's only a matter of, is it 1 year, 2 years, 3 years? That's the only thing. So without some kind of immediate intervention, the slaughter will continue until they're defeated. You don't negotiate with people who want to murder you. It's impossible.
No, you can't. And it's also, this is a very dangerous situation, in part because, like, the reason why Armenia is acting now, right, in part is because, you know, they have been watching and I think, like, keying and, like, sort of editing their behavior as a result of how the Russian campaign in Ukraine has gone, right?
Yeah, they definitely see it as a way to get away from Russia. I mean, like any small state in Russia's sphere is doing right now, with the exception of Georgia, who's kind of doing the opposite.
Yeah, and there is this, I mean, one of the things that is really unsettling right now is there has been kind of a freeze in a number of conflicts around the world that we have seen thawing out for the last 5-6 years. It's been particularly, like, accelerating, this kind of, like, thaw in a bunch of these old frozen conflicts. And part of why is that there's this understanding by a lot of these regional powers that, like, well, if I kick the fucking door in, nobody's coming after me.
Right. And Azerbaijan understands that to a certain extent, which is why they acted the way they acted last year in September. I mean, the CSTO is a joke, but it does have a mutual defense clause just like NATO does. So an invasion of our borders should have triggered it. And that was if people had some kind of not sure if Russia could commit to other things, that cemented it for a lot of people. It cemented it for Armenia specifically. I mean, we're still technically legal members of that alliance, but we have no representation in it anymore. We don't take part in trainings. We don't go to meetings. We're functionally out of it. And we certainly will be after this, I believe. But I mean, as an example of how you can't really negotiate with someone with this kind of ideology insofar as from this position. Like, I'm not saying that, like, this only ends with international peacekeepers hoisting a flag over Baku.
Yeah.
But with this kind of power discrepancy, the Azeri government has said that they will negotiate with the government in Stepanakert, in Karabakh, once they dissolve and lay down all their weapons. So once you completely disarm and get rid of all of the ways you can defend yourself from the obvious slaughter that's coming your way, then we'll talk. Is that really a way? Is that a way of any negotiations could ever happen? Like, being realistic, of course it's not. The government of Karabakh is the only thing. The government of Karabakh and the small local self-defense force is the only negotiating, like, little crumb that they have, because it's stopping them from being murdered. And for people who think I'm being, like, I'm overreacting or something, look at how they treated any Armenian civilians that fell into their hands into the 2020 war. They cut off their ears, they cut off their fingers, they cut off their noses, they fucking beheaded them. It was like watching ISIS videos, but they're wearing multicam and wearing fast helmets.
Yeah.
And they published them proudly on the internet. They're not ashamed of this. You can only imagine what happens when a city of 100,000 people falls into their hands.
Yeah. And that is, I mean,
Warsaw in the 1940s.
Something around like, about 120,000 people who are still there.
Armenia cannot solve this problem.
No.
We do not have the power to force them to the negotiation table, to guarantee the rights of existence for people where they live. The countries that do are now friends with the country that is doing it. So It requires some actual diplomatic spine. And the thing is the joke is every time someone is deeply concerned about something, you take a drink and then you die of fucking alcoholism. But you can't say, we call for an immediate cease of the military offensive without an or what? Or fucking what? Like, what are you doing? Like, you can't use strong words to stop a fucking ballistic missile.
Yeah.
There needs to be an or.
We're staring at about a century since we had a series of conflicts, many of which were based around different sort of like regional powers scapegoating and then carrying out acts of tremendous violence against groups of people, including specifically the Armenians.
And every time, a tale as old as time, it's being treated as an anti-terror operation. And you can go back to 1915 during the genocide, the first genocide, and it's the same exact excuse the Ottoman Empire used.
Well, and it's being treated, that's how the Azeris are excusing it. But over here, like when you're talking about like U.S. politics, you're talking about Western politics, it's a thing that's happening over there, right? Like it's a couple of countries that most people don't know very much about. And like, why are we involved in this? And it's like, well, because this is the thing that we said, like after 100-something million people died, the idea that we all kind of came together with was, well, we should probably stop folks from doing some of the things that led to all of those terrible wars.
And you
we
often
just don't
hear people
anymore.
Frame it as, oh, those people have just been fighting forever.
Yeah. No.
Like, we haven't. It's been within my lifetime. Like, I'm 35 years old. This war is not older than I am.
Yeah, there was not always mass violence between like the people in this region, right? Like Azeris and Armenians have not been killing each other over Artsakh for thusans of years, right? Like that's
of course not.
It's
there's Armenians and Azeris
about as old as Volvo US.
Neighbors.
Yeah,
they used to live next to one another. We're not this intractable millennia long enemy.
But
this isn't one of those conflicts that you shouldn't do that with any conflict because it's a scapegoat to get you to stop caring and educating yourself about it. But specifically in the context of this episode, certainly not this conflict. This conflict involves very recent events.
Yeah.
And it's tied to major geopolitical events happening in the world right now that whatever country that you're living in and listening to, your country is involved in.
And it's, I mean, like the actual, as far as I can see, the actual like realistic solution here, because this is not a case, right? I don't think like shipping a bunch of fucking weapons is a realistic thing to hope for. Like the actual realistic case for stopping this is putting people in the country that provide some sort of like barrier to Azeri aggression, right? Like that's like it's taking action
we need
to
the
keep
same
peace.
thing that we did for Kosovo. Like,
yes.
It's exactly what we need without any kind of negotiations or debates. Like, that is the only thing that'll stop what is coming. It's not an if. This is coming.
And hey, online left people, the Azeris are buying Israeli arms. Like this is a situation in which like we're not talking about. We don't need guys kicking in doors. We literally need dudes standing around to create a barrier by the sheer political fact of their existence, right?
That's all it takes. And not to mention, if you're trying to frame this in like an anti-imperialist context or whatever, Azerbaijan is literally a fascist fucking dictatorship.
Yeah.
Like, Armenia, we have our problems. Karabakh, they have their problems, but they're functioning representative democracies, and with people in land that they've lived on. There are other people who are indigenous to that land as well, but it's all also theirs. It's if you want to think of it in that way, which I don't really like to do because it's dirt. But the real issue here is the people. People's lives are it doesn't fucking matter who controls Stepanakert at the end of the day if people are allowed to live there and live their lives in dignity in the way that they choose to live them.
Yeah.
But that's not going to happen if the fascist dictatorship's genocidal armies come storming through.
Right.
It's simply impossible. And that's one of the main reasons why Karabakh Armenians and the Armenian state as well has continuously said that Karabakh can't exist within the frameworks of the Azeri Republic, because the Azeri Republic is demonstrably anti-Armenian. Like, for instance, if you have an Armenian surname, like I do, you can't even go there. It doesn't even matter if you've even been to this country or not. Simply existing is enough to be denied entry. Like, it's not a place. I mean, if you want to see how they'll be treated, look how they treat their own fucking people.
Yeah.
It's like asking anyone to be liberated by the fucking forces of North Korea or Saudi Arabia or something. It's obscene. It's absurd. The only thing that, and I'm not saying I support the government in Armenia. As anybody who knows me, I don't support any government. But the only constant track they've had is we support their right for self-determination, as anybody should. And they voted in the 80s to be on their own, not to be part of Armenia, not to be part of Azerbaijan, but to be the Republic of Artsakh, because they're the only people who care about their own rights, their own dignity, and their own right to existence. That's all anybody should ever defend is people's rights to do that.
Yeah.
And ever since they've made a functioning state with free and fair elections, ministries that handle these things, ministries of health, ministries of defense, ministries of education, it's a functioning republic. It's not some statelet that barely functions.
Yeah.
And so the powers invading it don't only mean to destroy the separatist power. They mean to destroy the people that live there.
Yep.
There's no room for them to exist in this country.
So, Joe, what do you expect us to see coming in the next couple of days here as we're about 24 hours in right now to the renewed Azeri attack on Artsakh? Like, what is your kind of expectation for what happens next?
Well, the Artsakh Defense Army is doing their best.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, they're fighting as hard as they possibly can. However, without immediate international intervention in some capacity, I mean physical intervention, you will stop or this will occur type situation, it's only a matter of time until it ends.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's...
And to quote the former head of Doctors Without Borders, you cannot stop a genocide with doctors.
Yeah.
There's only one way to stop it. And, like I've said a million times before, I believe before on your show,
yep,
the only thing that's allowing this to go on is the unwillingness of literally anybody to get involved. And
there's a couple of quotes about that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's not a new concept.
Yeah, and genocide studies.
As someone who studies war, studies genocide, and has fought in war is fucking awful, and I don't want it for anybody. I don't want Azeri kids, conscripts, to be fucking dying for this. I don't want Armenians to be dying for this. But the only thing that's going to stop it is someone who is not Armenian, not Azeri, and certainly not fucking Russian to say, stop or we will fucking stop it.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's as good a point to close on as there is, as we're going to find at least. Joe, do you have anything else you wanted to kind of bring up before we roll out here?
I would, this is normally where I would say you could support the people involved in this way, but unfortunately they're under siege. They're surrounded. Nothing can get to them. I got nothing, man.
Yeah. I mean, that is the reality, right? It's like, there's nowhere to send money. There's nothing to And to be quite frank, I think people should be harassing their representatives over this, but I'm not overly optimistic. Yeah, the Biden administration has been making noises, but I have not seen evidence that they're going to do more than that yet. So
I will
hope
say
they do.
if the United States gets involved and they really want to turn Armenia to the West, which they absolutely should, there's no better time like now. This is the chance to do it. You want to show that like the West is the way for Armenians and pull them completely away from Russia, because everybody wants to get the fuck away from Russia. Like there's thousands of people marching down the street literally saying fuck Russia yesterday. But you need to give them a path to do so, and this is the way to do it.
Yeah. Well, shit. Thanks, Joe. Sorry we keep having you on the show in this situation. We'll come on and talk about something. I don't know. We probably won't.
Neither of our shows ever talk about anything.
Neither of our shows talk about anything lighthearted. Check out Joe's show, Lions Led by Donkeys, the Lions Led by Donkeys podcast. Great military history podcast. Joe, thank you for being on, and please, I don't know. Good luck.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Rob.
Yeah.
Support for the show comes from Public, the investing platform for those who take it seriously. On Public, you can build a multi-asset portfolio of stocks, bonds, options, crypto, and now generated assets, which allow you to turn any idea into an investable index with AI. It all starts with your prompt. From renewable energy companies with high free cash flow to semiconductor suppliers growing revenue over 20% year over year, you can literally type any prompt and put the AI to work. It screens thousands of stocks, builds a one-of-a-kind index, and lets you backtest it against the S&P 500. Then you can invest in a few clicks. Generated assets are like ETFs with infinite possibilities, completely customizable and based on your thesis, not someone else's. Go to public.com/podcast and earn an uncapped 1% bonus when you transfer your portfolio. That's public.com/podcast. Paid for by Public Investing. Brokerage services by Open to the Public Investing Inc. Member FINRA and SIPC. Advisory services by Public Advisors LLC, SEC registered advisor. Generated assets is an interactive analysis tool. Output is for informational purposes only and is not an investment recommendation or advice. Complete disclosures available at public.com/disclosures.
Kids, pets, life, your sofa sees it all. But with a washable sofa, stains don't stand a chance. All of our sofa collections come with fully machine washable covers and cushions, making cleanup effortless. Liquid and stain-resistant fabrics provide extra protection against everyday messes. Plus, with modular designs, you can rearrange your sofa however you like. Perfect for growing families and changing spaces. Starting at just $699, it's time to upgrade to a stress-free, mess-proof sofa. Visit washablesofas.com today and save. Offers are subject to change and certain restrictions may apply.
Hey, this is U.S. Olympic gold medalist Tara Davis Woodhull.
And I'm U.S. Paralympic gold medalist Hunter Woodhull.
As athletes, our lives are about having a clear path.
And a team that you can absolutely trust.
So when it came to getting the best mortgage,
we chose PennyMac.
PennyMac is proud to be the official mortgage provider of Team USA and you.
Learn more at pennymac.com. PennyMac Loan Services, LLC, Equal Housing Lender, NMLS ID 35953. Licensed by the Department of Financial Protection and Innovation under the California Residential Mortgage Lending Act. Conditions and restrictions may apply.
Hi everyone, it's me, James, and just before you hear the episode, I want to warn you that you can hear our telephones going absolutely mental for much of this episode. That's because as we were recording, people found out that SDG&E, San Diego Gas and Electric, were restricting access to one of the sites where migrants were in need of aid. People were very concerned about that, so they were reaching out to James and Jacqueline and Pedro to ask for assistance and to me to let me know if I could get the word out. That's why you can hear our phones going crazy. And I think it's good that it's in there in a sense, because perhaps you can get a sense of how mad the last few weeks have been for everyone. Like, our phones have constantly been going off. I'm sure mine a lot less than James and Jacqueline's and Pedro's, because people are overwhelmed and they need more help than we're able to give. So consider that background noise a blessing, and I hope you enjoy the episode. Thanks. Hi everyone, it's me, James, today, and I'm here again to talk about the border. Today I'm joined by some guests. I'm joined by James and Jacqueline from Border Kindness, who we've heard from before, and I'm also joined by Pedro Rios from the American Friends Service Committee. If you guys would like to introduce yourselves and explain the kind of role you play along the border, that'd be wonderful. If we start with Pedro, because folks haven't heard from him before, that would be great.
Great. Thank you, James. And it's such an honor to be on the show together with folks from Border Kindness, James and Jacqueline. It's great to see you. Again, my name is Pedro Rios. I'm director of the American Friends Service Committee's U.S.-Mexico Border Program, which is a Quaker-based human rights organization. I've been on staff now for 20 years working in San Diego on border issues, and it's been a whirlwind of 2 decades of work, being able to follow this topic. Our work primarily focuses on border issues, and we have 4 components, one of which is documenting civil and human rights abuses that occur when contact goes awry between primarily federal immigration authorities with members of civil society, including migrants and border community residents. Documentation could be cases involving abusive practices, abusive policies, cases involving abuse of authority, and so on and so forth. We also do a lot of policy analysis and advocacy at the local level, at the state level, and at the federal level, trying to hold agencies accountable, making them more transparent, ensuring that there are oversight mechanisms in how they operate. And that's done in conjunction with several coalitions at the county-wide level in San Diego, but also at the national level with the Southern Border Communities Coalition and other organizations as well. And then we obviously work in allyship with a lot of other organizations that have campaigns of mutual interest, some of which have been going on for a long time, such as the Friends of Friendship Park, and trying to gain access, public access to Friendship Park, which currently is being impacted by the construction of 2 30-foot border walls. And we also work directly with community members in providing information about what the rights are, how they can become and are leaders in their own communities, and how they can be active in strengthening their communities and providing guidance to other people who might be in the same circumstances. So in a nutshell, that's the work that we do. Yeah, great. It's very important work. And then James and Jacqueline, do you want to explain? Folks are familiar, I think, with Border Kindness from the previous episode, but like maybe what have you been doing in the last, I can't remember, 2 weeks, since people started being held out in the open again?
So in our organization's kind of always evolving with like the evolving needs at the border. And over the last, I want to say like year in particular, we've really started to emphasize our services being present in the rural border. We're based in Mexicali primarily. Our water drops are generally in the Imperial Valley region. And we started to extend our services to the rural community in San Diego County with regards to like day labor, providing aid to the migrant community that's living in rural communities. So all that to say, when the border appeared to be having one of its episodes of chaos that's happened in the last couple of weeks, with folks being detained between the walls down in San Isidro, and then folks being, just dumped out into the street at the transit centers that we've been seeing all over San Diego County, we sort of held off because we knew this was going to happen in Jacumba. It was kind of one of those sixth sense kind of things, like when you see the writing on the wall, and it was like only a matter of time before people ended up pushed into rural San Diego County. And unfortunately, that has been the case. So we were actually out in the desert doing a water drop and heard that in fact had occurred. And there were hundreds of people in Jacumba. So we've been out there providing aid ever since.
Yeah. So perhaps we could describe these. So there are like 3 things I think people would benefit from knowing about. One is the detention of people between the walls in San Isidro, which I think Pedro has seen a lot of. We've seen each other down there several days. The detention of folks in the open desert in Jacumba, and this dumping of migrants at various transit centers across the county. Those are the 3 things which we've seen like in massive numbers this last couple of weeks. So perhaps we could start with explaining Hukumba, and then Pedro can take on explaining the other two, because I know he's been responding to those. So can you just tell us like what you saw, the number of people, the conditions in which they're being held, and that kind of stuff?
Yeah. Usually what we're seeing now, now it's currently what is today? Wednesday? I know
it is. Yeah.
I woke up this morning and asked Jacqueline what day it was, because it just seems like a blur, the day in and day out. But we are on Wednesday now, so that's Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. Every day so far, we have noticed a revolving door of roughly 200 to 250 spread out between 1 to 3 camps every day. There's a camp on the east side in Hukumba. There's a camp that's on the west side of Hukumba, and then there's a camp that's just outside Hukumba and Boulevard. That seems to be the biggest camp right now. That camp is the largest one because it's kind of hidden. You got to drive down from the main highway. You have to drive, at least 15 minutes, down some dirt roads, back roads, past ranches and stuff like that to get to that open air camp, where the other ones, and especially like we saw in May, were more like wide open, closer to the towns, closer to visibility, closer to highway access. And so what we've noticed is that, speaking with the locals and seeing for ourselves, that every day the camps that are more visible are having less people coming in, and they're being taken out faster. And so that part, I think, is, could be done for a multitude of reasons, but the camp that's hidden and out of view is the one that seems kind of strategic and seems calculated, on a greater level, that as people are being loaded up on vans or buses to be taken out for processing, almost the same amount of people gets walked in to that camp from the actual border by Border Patrol. So it's definitely an odd situation that's going on there. It seems definitely calculated, orchestrated, and something that, we feel that will be going on for quite a while.
Yeah. Let's, when we talk about that, right? So like people are crossing and then being transported, like you say, on foot by Border Patrol to the camp. That's your understanding, right? To that camp in near Boulevard, I'll say. I don't want to give the exact location.
Correct. Yes. We witnessed that as well. We witnessed on Monday night that we were there to help distribute food and warm supplies. And I think a total of 5 or 6 Border Patrol vans had, about 100 people or so lined up and loaded up onto those vans. And then right as they were getting ready to have the last 2 vans leave, we saw in the distance, in the opposite direction, Border Patrol, their truck driving behind a group of roughly 80, 85 new migrants coming in on foot.
Yeah.
Right around the corner, there's a gap in the fence.
Yeah, I saw people walking in. I was there the day before you guys, so I was there early. Actually, I was there early Monday morning, and I saw the same thing, like, sort of just after dawn. But I couldn't make out who was walking whom just because it was dark. Can you explain briefly, and then we'll move to Pedro's situation. Can you explain the services that are provided for them by Border Patrol, and then what is provided for them by volunteers?
By Border Patrol, it's essentially nothing. When this occurred in May, we heard that at most people were receiving an 8-ounce bottle of water daily, not really distributed in an organized manner. Currently, we're observing that people are, when they arrive, they're at times provided with a 16-ounce bottle of water and potentially a little toddler-sized pack of Goldfish crackers. Border Patrol is not providing any other continued services, food, shelter, sanitation, anything like that. Those things have all been organized at a community level by a variety of organizations, such as ours, that's comprised of just regular people. So it's the government's task of managing a humanitarian crisis, they have like really outsourced it to the general community of supporters. So they have taken not just the role of not having any responsibility towards caring for migrants in like the most basic manner, but it also seems like they have come to expect the general community to come in and fill the gaps that they're not meeting. So Border Patrol is not providing them with anything. It's everyday regular people that are showing up with blankets, food, water, hygiene items. It's getting really cold, so people are distributing warm clothing, diapers, formula, anything that people need is being provided by the community.
Yeah, that's a good summary, I think. So Pedro, could you explain how the situation is in San Isidro, and then also at the transit centers? And it's a pretty similar situation, I think.
Yeah, sure. I'll start with San Isidro, and the location where community members and organizations have set up is known as Whiskey 8. There are at least 3 other locations that we know where encampments have formed. One is Whiskey 4, which is close to the Las Americas shopping mall. It's an outlet mall closer to the port of entry. And then about a mile west of Whiskey 8, there's Spooner's Mesa. And then close to that, there's 91X. The Spooner's Mesa is primarily where the men's encampment has been arranged. And this happened back in May. There was an incident where Border Patrol decided to move all the single adult men and march them essentially about a mile up a hill and then up another hill to get to Spooner's Mesa. After some advocacy last week, we convinced Border Patrol to allow 2 of us to go up there to feed about anywhere between 380 and 400 men. And it took us over about an hour, 15 minutes to feed all of the men. Fortunately, we just barely had enough food for all of them. This was in the evening, and as we were driving in and driving out, all we could see was Mylar blankets strewn about, and that's all there was up there. And these were the men that were these Mylar blankets. Down in Whiskey 8, how community members and organizations have arranged the Solidarity Support Stations have been in 4 sets. So you have the charging station, you have the medical supplies and other item station, then you have the food station, and then the water station. And so we try to maintain the medical supplies. The food station is available only when we have enough food to provide sustenance to everyone there. We don't want to create a situation where we only serve half of the people or a quarter of the people, and then the other people go hungry. And mind you, it's important to point out that when people arrive there, they are hungry, they are thirsty. Some of them have scrapes because they scaled the primary border barrier and injured themselves. Others are wet because they walked through the canal to get to that location. I've also witnessed on several occasions where Border Patrol will tell people who are injured to walk towards our location because they tell them that that's where we will provide them with medical care. Now, I think it's important to mention that under Customs and Border Protection, which is a parent agency of the Border Patrol, under their national standards for how they are supposed to transport, escort, detain, and search people under their custody, they are obligated to feed, to provide water, to provide shelter, to treat medical urgencies anytime that individuals are under their custody. There is some back and forth. Border Patrol locally will say that individuals are not under their custody until they are being transported, even though they will provide them with a wristband or a bracelet. In some cases, tell them to remove their shoelaces, direct them to where they should be walking, yell at them when they're not forming in lines in order to be picked up, sometimes throw a fit and will not pick people up even though they're supposed to be there to do that because people are not in lines as quickly as they should be. All of this to several of our organizations indicate that Border Patrol to some degree has people under their custody, and as such is violating these national standards because it's not meeting their needs at any level besides maybe the bottle of water might provide and the 1 or 2 granola bars they provide per day, if even that.
Yeah, I think it's the National Border Patrol PIO also claimed to me that they were not detaining people and that people were free to, quote, return to Mexico, which these people aren't from Mexico, and in many cases, and I think the first day I saw you speaking to one family who had come from Mexico, but the vast majority of people weren't, and they'd also be entering Mexico between ports of entry because they're in the United States at this time. So yeah, it's just not. Those people are there's lots of evidence that they're being detained, even if they say they're not. What then happens to those people? We've all seen it, right? These vans pull up. They generally process people in a certain order, which is to take unaccompanied minors, then women who are alone with children, and then families, and then single adults. What happens to them once they get on that van? Do we have a clear sense of that and where they end up?
They will be taken to any one of several Border Patrol stations for processing. And it's at that processing stage where most of them who are in these locations are there because they want to present themselves to the authority and begin an asylum claim. Mm-hmm. And so it's how they answer the questions while being processed that they get tracked mostly for asylum. There are some that will be quickly removed from the country expeditiously, but most of them will be tracked for asylum. They will be given a court date when they should show up, and that court date, the court location depends on where their final destination will be. Technically, Mexicans can only be detained for 48 hours. Non-Mexicans can only be detained no more than 72 hours. So within that detention period, they then are being transported to one of 4 locations in San Diego County, 2 of which are in San Diego, the San Isidro Transit Center and the Iris Transit Center, one in Oceanside and the other in El Cajon. And so we're seeing the majority of the people being transported to San Isidro and to Iris, and that's where colleagues with other sister organizations are leading the charge to try to support them with assisting in charging phones, providing food, clothing, getting them to the airport, getting them transportation, getting them housing, and as much as limited as that's possible, trying to connect them with lost family members because families have been separated. There are adult children, 18, 19, who also are trying to figure out where their family members are. And then in some cases, as a conversation I had with the man from Venezuela, he had no idea what city he was at. He didn't know he was in San Diego. Mm-hmm. And so trying to make that type of arrangement and clarification is always challenging as well.
Yeah, and obviously also expensive, right? Like these things all place burdens on like your donation network and both and sort of the community in general. And perhaps we can talk about because the scale of support that's been provided by the community is extremely impressive, given how many people have already come through this sort of not detention system. But perhaps both of you could talk about the support you've been able to provide and how people who are not in San Diego can help you continue to provide that support.
So the first day that we heard of folks coming in, because obviously it's interesting because Border Patrol, like Pedro says, they're claiming that these people are not under their care, but they're very much acting as if they are under their detained care. They're telling people that if they call an ambulance to seek medical care, as we observed, they say, well, that's going to affect your case if you leave. Yeah. And so people are very much under the deliberate impression that they are being detained, but they're not being cared for in the most basic way. And so we first responded on Saturday. By Sunday, we were there with 500 meals. That went very, very quickly. Providing shelter items for people. So tarps. Jacumba is a very rugged desert terrain. There is no shade in these areas. So people are making sort of makeshift shelters, but there is nothing shielding them from the sun, which is really unrelenting all day. And it gets up to the 90s. So we've been providing tarps, pop-ups, that sort of thing. So people are not becoming sick from overexposure. We're providing hygiene items. We're providing just basic needs. And that gets incredibly expensive because if it was a static situation, such as in May, when there was 1,800 to 2,000 people, that was a huge undertaking that also took a lot of community collaboration to meet the needs of so many people. But this time around, as James says, it's like a revolving door of hundreds and hundreds of people. So it's taking hundreds and hundreds. While at any given time, there may be only, and I say only, 200 to 300 people. That doesn't mean that only 200 to 300 people needed to be fed that day.
Right.
It's that, that is who is there at that time. And when people arrive, as Pedro said, like they haven't eaten in days. We talked to people that said that they took 2 days to walk to Jacumba. So if they arrive to Tijuana without much food in their belly, and then they're having to walk for 2 days, they're arriving starving and begging for food and not being provided with absolutely anything. So if it wasn't for all of the organizations that are showing up and taking sort of shifts to feed people, there would be nothing for them. And we have absolutely no idea how long this is going to go on. It could be over today. It can go on for months, year. I mean, we really don't know what to expect. And organizations are being relied on to provide, life-sustaining care for people, but we're not being communicated with from Border Patrol as to basically anything. What the outlook is, what the numbers are, what the updates of how the situation is going to evolve. So every day is a surprise, and we need to have resources to be able to meet the needs of that day. It's incredibly consuming of every resource, including time, and gas is $6 a gallon.
Yeah.
Now, and
you need to drive your truck, right? Because you can't get to some of the locations. I know I have a bigger truck, and lots of my friends have had to catch a ride with me because their cars can't make it there.
Exactly. We have people that have gas efficient low Priuses and stuff, and they're going to bottom out there. So we have our huge lifted Jeep that, doesn't get as much gas mileage as something, but it's also going to be able to get the supplies out there. So every aspect of it is incredibly consuming of resources. And we don't know what to expect. It's hard to budget.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't know what to expect. So the community has obviously come together in support, but then it's how do we manage this when we can't forecast what's going on? So it's tough. It's definitely tough. We need sustained support.
If I may add on that, as Jacqueline said, the people are showing up hungry, haven't eaten for days. We get reports that, people are showing up just begging for food, and the federal government, more specifically DHS, more specifically CBP, Border Patrol, know this.
Mm-hmm.
They're trying to stall people out. Whatever the end game is, it maybe it's just another arm of, prevention through deterrence. It's cruel. It's on purpose. People, are the pawns in whatever, game is being played, and it's cruel. And that's, we're doing what we can to try to offset that as much as possible. But cruelty is definitely there all across the border.
Just to kind of build on what James said, I think it's very easy for this construct of migrants to always be this sort of demonized other. Fox News and KUSI and all these outlets do that very well. But I think it's really important to the people who we're being cruel to. I saw a lady breastfeeding in the desert on Sunday night. I've seen grandparents. I've seen people who are 8 months pregnant, little children. These aren't people who have done anything wrong, and they just for whatever reason they're coming here. It doesn't really matter. They don't deserve to be treated like that. And James said, it's something of an induced. I've been to natural disasters all over the world and reported on those and seen those, and I've been to refugee camps all over the world. But it's something of a unique to the US problem that our federal government can click its fingers and induce a humanitarian crisis, and then hold its hands up in the air and say we can't help you. That like aside from dictatorial regimes in places I've reported in, like governments don't do that very often. And like James said, it's these people who pay the price. It's not us for the most part. Pedro, could you maybe explain a little bit of how American Friends Service Committee has been able to respond and the resources you've used and how you can help make this a little bit less painful for the people who are being held in between the fences?
Sure. Learning from the experience that we had back in March, April, and May, we heard a few weeks ago that there were people lined up in an area that we could not see from the U.S. side, but could be seen from the Mexican side, just west of the San Isidro port of entry, with people wearing and using Mylar blankets. And so the Mylar blankets were an indication to us that people were there for probably longer than 4 hours. And so we kept monitoring that, asking colleagues in Tijuana to inform us if they had seen any other groups like that. And off and on over the past month, there were reports of that. And it wasn't until about 2 weeks ago that someone said that they were there for a long period of time. So last week, we set up what we called an observation post at Whiskey 8 so that we could determine for ourselves how long people were there, what sort of needs they might have, and how to respond, whether to set up the solidarity support stations again. And quickly we determined that that's what we needed to do. So we called our colleagues from other organizations. Universidad Popular, for instance, has been extremely helpful in leading the charge in different places. The Free Shit Collective, which is a mutual group, also has been extremely important in having their people out there. And Friends of Friendship Park also has been important. So all these organizations that responded quickly and started to build from the experience that we had back in late spring, setting up these stations to charge phones. Phones are a lifeline for people. And back in May, Border Patrol threatened us, and they said, if you want to keep feeding people, you can't be charging their phones. And so we said, well, we're going to have to keep charging phones because people need them. And fortunately, Border Patrol backed off then, and now it's part of what we do, right? We charge phones, and it's how people are able to communicate with their loved ones, especially if they've been separated. Feeding people is just as much as we're able to, even if it's just a sandwich, even if it's a warm meal that we're able to get through the bars or the secondary border barrier, that could mean the difference between someone staying healthy or someone becoming seriously ill. Bandaging up small cuts could relieve someone from getting an infection. Identifying when medical emergencies pop up. So an 8-month pregnant person who is suddenly having labor pains and having and needing to call 911, for instance, or insisting with Border Patrol that the 1-month-old child cannot remain overnight in between border walls, and just insisting and insisting and insisting. Insisting that the 2 porta potties that they have there need to be serviced, for instance. And so all of this advocacy is happening at the same time that our colleagues and allies are also feeding people, and the constant communication with different elected officials, pushing on them to take charge and to respond, has been one of the different aspects of our response to what is a humanitarian disaster that has been slowly evolving, I would say, over years and years, because human migration isn't centered around humanitarian needs and human rights. It's been centered around enforcement, around militarization, around cruel deterrence, as James was talking about, which creates conditions where people are led to suffer. And that's what we're seeing right now, people suffering because of how this has been manufactured, how immigration has been dealt with, regardless of who's in the White House, over and over and over. And so now we're challenged to respond to these humanitarian needs in ways that are stretching our limits, but we're able to do it, and hopefully lifting up the dignity of people that are placed under these terrible, inhumane conditions.
Yeah, I think it's very important to give people a little bit of dignity as much as we can. One thing that you mentioned that we haven't spoken about and we should is elected officials and local, federal, state governments. How much support, if any, have either of these sites received from people in elected office?
We have had support from Senator Steve Padilla's office. Mm-hmm. That's been, to me, impressive to see how much interest there is, how much advocacy there is from staff from that office. Yeah. We have not necessarily had much support from congressional or federal senators. We have not seen them really on the ground. There is a responsibility, I believe, that the County of San Diego has to meet some of these challenging circumstances at the transit centers. They're balking, I feel, and to the detriment of people who need these services and need the support. I believe the San Diego Police Department has been suggesting where people should be dropped off and not listening to folks on the ground about how the Iris station should be central and not dividing the drop-offs between Iris and San Isidro, for instance. Yeah. So there's a lot of necessity for local governments to be coordinating with state and federal governments, and that's lacking, again, to the detriment of people who are caught in the middle.
Mm-hmm. How about James and Jacqueline? Have you seen any sort of government support?
No, not at all. No. I've heard through channels of sources that work for the county, and they claim that they're handcuffed or that it's Border Patrol's responsibility, and the Border Patrol is saying it's the county's responsibility. And it seems like pointing fingers. No one's trying to take responsibility for it. And maybe that's because it's going to be something that's going to go on for a while, and it's not something that either wants to take on the responsibility of. And you've seen county supervisors speak out against it, pushing the blame. People are here. This is San Diego County. This is the United States. Someone needs to take care of the people here. That's the role of the government. That's why people pay taxes for for services, and services need to be provided for. We pay taxes so other people can get services as well. Citizens, non-citizens, like that. To me, it seems so easy.
Theory.
Yeah, in theory.
Absolutely,
in theory. I mean, that's everything that you've been told, but everything that you're not seeing, in practice. So, I mean, this whole thing is, to us on the ground, it seems so simple of how it should be done, but anytime, and we spoke on it, I think on the last episode as well, like money's a big issue. So they're going to spend all this money. They need to make sure that their money is going in the right pockets that they want it to.
Yeah, like I was sitting out in Jacumba with a colleague, and we got overflown by a UH-60 Black Hawk, like a Border Patrol helicopter, right? And it just hovering around, checking us out, and like it's just so. I don't know. It's just so depressing to see this helicopter, which costs millions of dollars, which costs thousands of dollars just to take off, next to the border wall, which costs $12 million a mile. And like on the same day that the San Diego City Council filed an amicus brief in this case of the Supreme Court to allow it to further criminalize unhoused people, we have all these resources and we're just throwing them, as Pedro said, enforcement and criminalization of the most marginalized people in our communities, rather than giving a thirsty person a bottle of water or like a little baby a blanket. And yeah, it's really hard.
It's one of those agents overtime of the day could literally feed everybody there.
Yes.
Instead, we're all like, calculating calories per dollar of like the meal and trying to get like every single dollar to stretch, because we don't know how long this is going to go on, because we know that public perception and interest is something that is not sustained. Mm-hmm. And that's on purpose too, because for instance, Border Patrol is claiming, and they were on what outlet was it?
CBS 8 local San Diego said, made a report that the Jacumba camps are cleared. There's no one's there. I just, I had to step away from this recording for a few to get an update that there are people still showing up. There's trying to get cleared out as quick as possible as people show up, because it's in the public eye. But also now the power company is threatening legal action and criminal action against any aid orgs or people that show up.
Oh, great. Cool. That'll be fun. Yeah. I mean, yeah, the reporting on this has been poor, even more poor than it was in May, I'll say. Like out in Hakumba, yeah, it's hard to get to. James and I both spent a decent chunk of yesterday morning trying to direct people how to not get lost out there. But like, I think more pertinently, when there is not an election or like a narrative that migration fits in, it gets certainly by national outlets forgotten. With the end of Title 42 in May, I think everyone had their like sort of doomsday op-eds in the weeks beforehand, and then that didn't actually happen in the way that it had been sort of like quote unquote experts who don't come to the border very often had predicted it would, and so folks turned up, especially at Whiskey 8, and did their sort of crisis story. But we haven't seen that this time.
And now it's appearing really different, because like you see sort of the management by Border Patrol of the situation in order to sort of shield the public from like the true level of the crisis. So in claiming that Hakumba has been cleared, I suppose that's technically correct if they're referring to the, they're relying on in order to, so people, the average everyday person that's not immersed in this is going to read that and be like, oh, good, it's been cleared. Because like my family back home knows a lot of like really conservative folks out in the Imperial Valley, and like even the most conservative people I knew back in May were like, oh my gosh, how could they have babies out there in the desert? That's so horrible. And people had, a lot of really strong emotions to seeing families huddled in the desert for a week. Now it seems like there's a really deliberate management of like the PR with respect to this situation. So yeah, like relying on the technicality of Hakumba being cleared because the main camp in town has been cleared, but 10, 15 minutes away, there's still hundreds of people. And we're the ones that are out on social media screaming into the void and to each other, hey, this is still happening. People are, there's an amputee out here whose leg is bleeding. There is someone out here who hasn't had his heart medication for a week. Yep. Like those kind of situations are occurring still, while the report and the public perception is like, oh, Hakumba's been cleared, it's all good. So unless somebody is like already involved, they're generally not hearing about it. And I think that's on purpose too.
Yeah. I think that's a very niche technicality, isn't it? It might not be within the boundaries of the town of Hakumba, but like people are still being corralled in the desert with no services.
Right.
And that's what we should care about, not which district they're in or what have you. So I think people have probably heard by now that things are bad and we don't know how bad they will be. And then maybe they'll get worse, maybe they'll get better. And hopefully they'll want to support. So how can people do that? Like what resource, like what, I guess, like concrete actions can they take? Where can they give you money? How can they send you supplies? If they want to volunteer and they're in the county, how can they do that? And what kind of volunteers are most needed?
Yeah, for Border Kindness, monetary donations are the biggest help that allows us to meet current needs, daily needs. We're on Venmo at Border-Kindness, Cash App at Border Kindness Cash, Zelle info at borderkindness.org.
That's
with respect to volunteering, volunteering is pretty sensitive. We understand that our team is already incredibly taxed. So we do need support in terms of like food preparation and getting supplies out there, transporting supplies, but it is a very sensitive situation. So we do want to, I don't know if vet, or we want to be able to talk to the people that want to volunteer. So certain expectations that they may have, or certain needs that we may have, are all communicated really clearly. So the organization Al Otro Lado very amazingly agreed to help us with that task of screening volunteers. So people, if they are wanting to do so and come out to Hakumba, to email volunteer at alotrolado.org.
Perfect. Yeah, that's really good.
I'll send you that info, and they can just say like, what are they interested in doing, where are they located, and that sort of thing, and then we'll be in touch.
Mm-hmm.
Primarily, I mean, more than anything, like $20 is a tarp to cover a family and keep somebody shielded from the wind.
Yeah.
We can feed a lot of people with $100. So financial support is the most direct way, even though it's not necessarily always feasible for people. It is the most efficient way for us to be able to buy items in bulk.
Yeah. And like even $5, right? Like maybe that's 2 people and it really makes their day to have a hot meal.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Anything helps.
So yeah, people can definitely do this. How about for American French Service Committee, Pedro? How can people donate, volunteer, help?
Yeah, I mean, I would also stress what Jacqueline said in terms of vetting people and volunteers. It's it's not easy work, and we want to make sure that when people are volunteering, that there's a certain level of emotional strength that people are able to have. It's very tough work, and at the same time, make sure that what we're doing does not negatively impact those that we are presuming to want to help. Right. And so that's important. I think going through those channels, if you, the folks that are leading the work at the transit centers, check in with them first. But then there are other things that could be done. The other day, someone showed up with 20 boxes of pizza, a very useful, easy way to support, connecting with people and finding out what the needs are. That's another way. If you would rather purchase the tarps yourselves, for instance, do that, and then we can pick them up. We can find out how to meet and pick up those items. If you want to donate, there are multiple organizations doing this work. I believe someone was working on a list to produce. For us, going on the website, afsc.org, and being sure that you find our location, San Diego, so that our program then receives that donation directly. If the program goes to the overall AFSC, we won't see it. So just be very mindful of when you're donating to afsc.org. First locate the San Diego program office and then find the donate page on there so that we can be assured that you are sending it to our program. Or you can definitely contact me and I could also assist you with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's great. I think it's important that both of you sort of centered with regard to volunteering, that like there are organizations that exist to serve volunteers through facilitating like a service experience to them. And that's not what is happening here. Like this is about serving people who are very vulnerable. So like there has to be some kind of vetting process and people have to understand that like that's part of keeping those people safe. And that's why that's happening. So yeah, thank you very much for this. We'll keep covering it, obviously, and I really hope people can find some resources to donate because it's been very taxing financially on all these groups and on our community generally. Is there anything else you guys would like to share before we finish up?
The only thing I would add is that pressing the authorities. That's the other way. If you are able to connect with the county. Mm-hmm. Your county supervisor in San Diego, press on them that they have a responsibility and an obligation to respond to this in a way that supports people who need the support. And that's where I would push towards.
Yeah, I'll add to that having spoken to people in the county and in state office, like if you call, that makes more difference than if you email. So like if you have the time to make a phone call, that could help a lot. Anything else from you, James or Jacqueline?
That's what I can think of. I mean, everything changes daily. So if we were to record an episode every single day, I'm sure I could come with something new.
Yeah.
For people to stay clued in with channels of communication, such as this podcast, that are actually with people on the ground, and share that with their community is really important. Like we're already getting like some social media kind of comments. I mean, it happens every time about how we're aiding and abetting people breaking the law. But it's the government breaking the law. They're breaking international asylum law. Yeah. And it's really important for people who aren't as versed in all of this to stay aware of that everybody who is presenting for asylum has a legal right to do so. Not that it matters. I mean, they have it's a humanitarian right.
Yeah.
But for people who are very concerned with legality, or at least they lean heavily on legality, presenting for asylum is a legally protected right. And that's something that is actually being cut short by the government in violation of that.
Yeah. And I think you're right. It doesn't really matter. I really don't give a shit about
no, but it come back for people that really are about it,
Yeah. It's good to remind them that they are wrong, both morally and legally.
Exactly.
Yeah. So what would your social medias be if people wanted to keep up to date with what's happening?
Border Kindness on Instagram tends to have the most up-to-date comment, shares of what we're doing. And that will have updates in our stories and our posts of how to help, what's going on.
How about you, Pedro?
We're terrible with our social media, but you can definitely find some of our work there. AFSC San Diego. Just look for AFSC San Diego. Mine is Pedro Consafos. Pedro Consafos, mostly on Twitter, some IG, and I'll be updating some items later today.
Perfect. Yeah. One more question, because people contacted me in May to ask if they could donate air miles to facilitate travel for folks after they've been paroled into the US. Is that something that AFSC can do?
There is another organization. I'm not sure if that's what you just mentioned now. The Miles for Migrants. Is that what you mentioned?
Yeah, Miles for Migrants.
Yeah, absolutely. Wonderful organization, and that we've used through some of our other sister organizations and getting people to their final destinations. I would say that might be the best way right now.
Okay, yeah. So that's the thing people can do if they happen to have a surplus of those. Great. Thank you so much for your time. I know you're all extremely busy. I appreciate it. And yeah, hopefully people listening will find a way to support if they can. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Great. Thank you.
Hey, we'll be back Monday with more episodes every week from now until the heat death of the universe.
It Could Happen Here is a production of Cool Zone Media. For more podcasts from Cool Zone Media, visit our website, coolzonemedia.com, or check us out on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts. You can find sources for It Could Happen Here updated monthly at coolzonemedia.com/sources. Thanks for listening.
Kids, pets, life, your sofa sees it all. But with a washable sofa, stains don't stand a chance. All of our sofa collections come with fully machine washable covers and cushions, making cleanup effortless. Liquid and stain-resistant fabrics provide extra protection against everyday messes. Plus, with modular designs, you can rearrange your sofa however you like. Perfect for growing families and changing spaces. Starting at just $699, it's time to upgrade to a stress-free, mess-proof sofa. Visit washablesofas.com today and save. Offers are subject to change and certain restrictions may apply.
In the heat of battle, your squad relies on you. Don't let them down. Unlock elite gaming tech at Lenovo.com. Dominate every match with next-level speed, seamless streaming, and performance that won't quit. Push your gameplay beyond performance with Intel Core Ultra processors for the next era of gaming. Upgrade to smooth, high-quality streaming with Intel Wi-Fi 6E and maximize game performance with enhanced overclocking. Win the tech search. Power up at Lenovo.com.
Lenovo. Flag football is exploding, and iFlag is leading the way. As the Guinness World Record holder, iFlag hosts premier flag football tournaments nationwide for boys, girls, high school girls, and adults. From first-time players to elite competitors, iFlag delivers top-level competition, unforgettable experiences, and a community built around the game. Ready to be part of it? Join the movement. Find your tournament and learn more at iflag.org. That's iflag.org.
This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed Human.